Cabinet, I'd like to inform those present that this meeting is being webcast live and will be capable of repeated viewing. Do any members wish to declare any interest in relation to any matters that are included on today's agenda? No declarations. Thank you, colleagues.
Alan does have one.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, I'm a trustee on the Royal Pavilion, so I should be leaving the room and not voting when that comes up. Thank you. Sorry again.
Thanks, Councillor Robbins. Appreciated. Exclusion of press and public. Does Cabinet agree to retain the items listed in Part 2 of the agenda as confidential items as defined by the Local Government Act 1972, and as such to request members of the press and public and any members or officers who do not have a direct interest in the items to leave when these items are reached? Agreed. Thank you, colleagues. Does Cabinet agree to the minutes of our previous meeting back in November as an accurate record? Agreed. Thanks very much, colleagues. Turning today to my communications, since our Cabinet meeting last month, members and officers have been working incredibly hard as ever to deliver for our city. The multi-use games area in Hangleton has been refurbished and is looking fantastic and already being well used, as is the games area in Saltdean. We are investing in facilities that residents need to stay healthy and to play sports. To match this, our Labour government announced yesterday that Brighton is one of only 8 early adopters to pilot the government's new Young Futures hubs, which are a key part of the new National Youth Strategy. The Conservatives overlooked young people for far too long, and the Young Futures programme will create a national network of inclusive, youth-led spaces for 10 to 18-year-olds, along with support for those up to 25 years old that have special educational needs. It's a brilliant opportunity for us to work with our young people here in the city and with our partners to co-design a space that offers real support. This comes, of course, alongside the new Child Poverty Action Strategy, which was published very recently by our government, today's homelessness strategy, and the scrapping of the two-child benefit limit in last month's budget. Also this month, we've rolled out real-time bin collection tracking, all part of our ambitious modernisation of the service, and most recently, food waste collections have started across the west of the city. Our plans for a new swimming pool in Dean have received planning permission, the first new swimming pool in the city for 40 years, while our draft budget would protect our offer of free swimming for under 18s in our council-run swimming pools. We've received 2 gold awards in the last month, the first from the Sutton Trust for our package of school reforms, meaning our secondary school admissions policy is now one of the most progressive in the country, putting Brighton and Labour's values into action. And our council's planning team has very well deservedly jumped from bronze to gold in their rating this year by Planning Resource, the sector's leading publication, for the speed and quality of its decision-making. We've participated in the 16 days of activism campaign, highlighting the council services and third-party organisations available to support women and girls in the city facing domestic abuse. We've commemorated World AIDS Day and renewed our achievable commitment to end all new HIV transmission in the city by 2030. And we've commemorated Trans Day of Remembrance, remembering trans lives lost to violence. Following the decision made at Cabinet last month, we've also formed part of the government's official bid for the Women's FIFA Football World Cup in 2035 as one of the potential host cities, one of 16. And we've launched a new campaign on the harm caused by particle pollution from wood burners over the winter months. We've also launched a new consultation on a planned community safety strategy. I'm really proud to announce for the first time today that we've also rolled out operating women's only emergency accommodation and temporary accommodation in response to feedback we received about the lack of safety that some women experience who have been housed by us due to their experiencing homelessness. Today's agenda is shaped by a strong focus on our finances and the strategic decisions that will define our city's future. We begin with the October 2025 Targeted Budget Management Report, which examines the impact of our risk management measures on our current financial position and our year-end forecast. While we have seen improvements since the start of the financial year, significant overspend risks remain in the general fund, housing revenue account and schools budget. Critically low reserves, an inheritance from the previous Conservative government and local Green Party, mean we must maintain our drive for continuous improvement through tighter controls, directorate recovery plans, and our ongoing transformation work, including digital transformation. Looking ahead, today we'll also consider the General Fund draft budget and resources update for 26-27 to 29-30. This is where our council plan comes to life in financial terms, aligning our budgets with our ambition for a better Brighton and Hove for all. The draft budget and medium-term financial strategy highlight the scale of our challenge, projecting a gap of around £24.9 million next year and over £80 million across the period before savings. The report details the savings and transformation programmes proposed for key services, such as adult social care and housing, and sets out our assumptions on council tax and national funding reforms ahead of the provisional local government finance settlement, which we expect next week. We also have a report today on libraries, and I note the keen public interest in this and residents in the public gallery. No one enters politics wanting to make difficult decisions about closing certain public facilities. But the challenge we face from past chronic underfunding across the public sector, from health to local government, is real. And even though our government is now providing real terms funding uplifts, the pressures on our services and the complexity of issues we face is also real. This was very much evidenced by our CQC inspection into adult social care this month, which ranked us as requiring improvement. We aim to reshape how libraries operate, exploring new income streams, partnerships and changes to the estate, while maintaining as much access for communities as possible. Our City Transport Plan 2035 will set a strategic direction for safer, cleaner and more inclusive transport over the next decade. It brings together our climate and air quality goals with improvements in public transport, active travel and road safety, underpinning future bids for external funding and investment in our city's transport network. We will also discuss our homelessness and rough sleeping strategy 2035 to 30, which responds to the sharp increases in homelessness, temporary accommodation costs and rough sleeping. This strategy takes a prevention-first partnership approach to reduce demand for expensive temporary accommodation, improve pathways out of rough sleeping, and align closely with our financial recovery work in homes and adult social care. I was privileged early this week to visit the Clock Tower Sanctuary, which is an organisation that provides support for young people between 18 and 35 experiencing homelessness. And I just want to put on record my deep appreciation for the many charities and organisations in the city that provide excellent support services and the increasing partnership working we are doing with them to ensure that together we can deliver as much support as possible. Our agenda includes the Royal Pavilion and Museums Trust service fee for 26 to 31. The proposed funding agreement gives the Trust stability while recognising the Council's wider financial pressures, framing the service fee as an investment in our heritage, our visitor economy and our cultural offer. Finally, I want to highlight our response to the Regulator of Social Housing's C3 regulatory judgment. This 6-month update demonstrates significant progress on compliance and a major reduction in the historic council house repairs backlog. Strengthened leadership, governance and data quality are helping us to move from short-term recovery to a more embedded systems-led model. We're also seeking delegated authority to procure a 2-year stock condition survey, ensuring we can plan for the long-term condition of our homes and meet our emerging and evolving legal duties. Taken together, today's agenda shows a council that is ambitious for its residents, honest about the financial pressures we take, and determined to keep delivering improvements across the city. I'm grateful to all colleagues and officers in particular for their hard work, and I look forward to our discussions and decisions this afternoon. I propose that all items on today's agenda are reserved for discussion. Does the Cabinet agree? Agreed. Thank you, colleagues. Right, we will turn to public involvement for this afternoon. I understand that Ruth Williams will be reading a number of questions on residents' behalf today. To ensure a smoother and more efficient way to deal with the questions and to make sure we hear all the questions in the allotted 30 minutes that we have, I'm going to take the questions from Tara Coffey and Julie Lawrence first, and then ask Ruth to present all their questions as one block. So could I ask Tara Coffey if she would like to read the first question, please?
No.
Okay. I don't think we've got Tara with us today, unfortunately. So I'll move on to the second question I've got here, which is from Julie Lawrence. Hi, Julie. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of Rottingdean Parish Council, and I'm a Rottingdean Parish Councillor. So we welcome the fact that the proposal to close Rottingdean Library has now been removed from the proposals for Cabinet. This responds to the serious concerns raised by residents about losing Rottingdean Library that acts as a crucial community hub and welcomes nearly 30,000 visits annually, fosters literacy amongst local school children, especially those without access to books at home, as well as providing older residents with vital educational information, supports and opportunities for social interaction. So, will you now remove any uncertainty by providing an assurance that if alternative community-based provision is not possible, that Rottingdean Library will remain as part of the library network, and that all possible alternatives will be fully explored and presented to Cabinet before any libraries are considered for closure in the future? That's it. Thank you.
Julie, if you just want to wait there, I'm going to ask Councillor Robbins to respond to you. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks very much for your question. The proposal to close is not currently being taken forward, as you say. Officers will continue to work with the community to explore options which could support a longer-term sustainability of the service, as we recognise any changes would impact considerably on a number of residents. The recommendations today suggest a report back to Cabinet in 12 months' time. If any proposals were developed for significant change to how the community libraries in this city are managed in the future, would require us to follow a similar process to those undertaken this year, including a public consultation. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Julie, and thanks, Councillor Robbins. I have Ruth Williams now, who I understand is presenting a number of questions. Hi, Ruth. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. Apologies for my 3-year-old. I really hope she lets me ask all these questions.
Don't apologise for her. We're very pleased to see her.
She is a big fan of the library.
Sorry, are you asking questions for a number of people?
I am, yes, on behalf.
The name of the person you're asking the question?
I will, yep. So this is on behalf of Westdean Library. So the first question is from Alicia Buckingham. So councillors are being asked to vote on permanently closing Westdean Library when some of the most important information still hasn't been published. We still haven't seen the financial figures for what Jubilee Library will actually cost once the PFI ends. We haven't seen our feedback properly incorporated into your consultation papers, and we haven't seen the assessment of the citywide alternative that could save money without closures. Without these pieces of evidence, so what is this decision actually being based on?
Okay, thanks very much. Sorry.
If you want me to block.
Well, I'll do each question as we go, because then I'll know where we are. Council has been provided with a substantial and detailed report and appendices on which to base their decision, including the rationale for proposed changes, exploration and alternative suggestions for saving, the needs and use analysis and equality impact assessment. Public consultation responses are included in the appendix, and Cabinet members have been given access to a full text of all consultation responses, including emails, letters from residents of Westdean and pupils of the school. Given the financial challenges presented by the end of the Jubilee Library PFI contract and associated funding, we know, I believe that drifts into another question, doesn't it? Sorry.
Well, we were concerned about the fact that we didn't have the details of the PFI cost changes once that's been finished.
Given the financial challenges presented by the end of the Jubilee Library PFI contracts and associated funding, we know there will be further work needed around the future of sustainability of the library services. More information is available on the interactive PFI dashboard on gov.uk. However, those changes will not impact the Council until 2029, and the service was allocated savings targets to be met in 25 to 27. The revenue budget reductions has already been agreed at Budget Council in February 25. The administration is confident that the current recommendations can be delivered and still provide an effective and comprehensive library service. Thank you.
So the next question is from Kate Reid. You've described these closures as the first phase, with additional community library closures already being planned or modelled for the next phase. Why has the public not been told that this is the beginning of a wider programme?
There are no plans or models for additional community library closures. The proposals being discussed today are to meet a saving target assigned to the library services. There are no further savings identified for libraries in next financial year.
I can't ask follow-ups. No. I can't ask follow-ups. No. No. Okay. So the next question is mine. Looking at the report, in clause 3.50, records that the People Overview and Scrutiny Committee formally recommended that the Cabinet do not proceed with the library's closure plan at this time. Why is Cabinet choosing to advance the closure of Westdean Library despite this scrutiny warning? That was myself. So clause 3.50 about the Scrutiny Committee.
That's question 3 in the pack, Councillor Robbins. Question 3 in the pack.
It's we're shuffling them about a bit. It's a bit difficult for me to follow, but I understand where we are now. So with question 3, right, okay. Thank you for your feedback. I don't think it is question 3. I think it's question 4. Isn't it? Is it about clause 305 records? Yeah. The people and yeah. We recognise the Scrutiny Committee's recommendation and have carefully considered their concerns alongside other factors before making our final recommendations for Cabinet today. The report sets out in detail the rationale for the final recommendations.
The next question is from Louisa Taylor. The footfall data on which the review of Westdean's library use was based appears to have been from a period prior to the announcement of proposed closure and consultation. The footfall and use since that announcement has increased significantly. Residents often move in and out of Westdean, and many were not aware of the library's existence. If you enter the school only from the bottom of the field or do not pass through one of the one-way system on Bankside, you would not see that it actually exists because it's very small. It's actually only one room. The proposal to close the library has highlighted its existence to local residents, and the need and use mix has increased. Why has there been no attempt to look at the current data in the light of the recommendation by the People Overview and Scrutiny Committee not to go ahead with the proposals to close the library?
Well, again, thanks for the question. It's good to hear that local residents, that they value their local library, and we can see from the data that use has improved slightly over the summer. Footfall and usage was only one of a number of considerations when proposals were drafted. We also look at needs, geographic spread and the cost of delivery. While there are some fluctuations in use over the year, Westdean membership, borrowing and visitor figures continues to be among the lowest in the city. Changes to the library, therefore, would affect a relatively small number of residents.
So, question from Isabel Foxon. Part of your consultation mentions that the southern part of our ward go to Hove Library instead of Westdean. This is, of course, true. the southern part of our ward being Hove Park. Because our ward is so big, you've disproportionately allocated low footfall and low responses in the consultation to a large ward. Westdean is a small community with a one-room library, and the response it has generated is huge relative to the area it serves and the library size. Moreover, Westdean pupils access the library daily through the internal door, including during unstaffed hours. We don't believe that this footfall was counted. Why has flawed and incomplete data continued to be used as the basis for recommending closure?
Thank you. And thank you for your feedback. Footfall and usage were only, as I've said, one of the number of considerations when proposals are drafted. While the ward is geographically large, the number of people visiting Westdean Library is smaller than most other libraries in the city. The school do access the library through an internal door, and while we do not have the access data for the number of pupils visiting, we are able to track the number of items issued and the number of library cards in use, which would reflect the school usage of the book stock. These measures were low compared with other libraries in the city, and this data included the rationale for the proposals for change. We are aware the school uses the space in lieu of a more developed school space. The recommendations include the offer of officers to work closely with the school to explore how the library service can support pupils to access books and study space. There are options to explore which could provide an improved school library offer with donations of books and furniture. Thanks very much.
So, question from Marissa Brown. Like Rottingdean, Westdean residents cannot resource a library in the timescale proposed and have a much higher number of elderly residents and disabled residents than other parts of the city. Additionally, Westdean has no public transport route to the proposed alternative library and a long walk over 2 miles with hills and crossing the busy A23. Given the similarities, why is Rottingdean Library recommended to be retained, but Westdean to close?
Again, thank you. Consideration was given to the number of factors to decide which libraries were recommended for closure. These included levels of need in each area, including car ownership, measures of deprivation and use. We recognise library closures will negatively impact residents and could have disproportionately impacted the older residents who may find it more difficult to travel to alternative sites. However, the usage figures at Westdean are considerably lower than those at Rottingdean, so any changes would impact less residents.
Okay, question from Ronnie Graham. The report relies heavily not only the use of alternative libraries, which are genuinely challenging for primary age, elderly and disabled in our community to access, and a double bus option with a major A road between is not an acceptable alternative for these vulnerable groups, but also strong reliance is placed on the home delivery service. The service is only staffed and operated by volunteers and as such is irregular, only running when suitably mobile volunteers are available, and it's unreliable. As the library service has also placed a ban on recruiting new volunteers, how will councillors ensure that this service is up to the job that you claim it needs to be in order to provide a genuine, workable, acceptable alternative for those that need it most if Westdean Library closes?
Thanks very much, and thanks for your question again. We acknowledge concerns about home delivery service. The library service does include permanent staff allocated to the management of this service, and they will continue to review the service and respond to the changing needs and as a result of the proposals. Sorry.
Okay. So question from Esther Sweeney. Given that the Equality Impact Assessment identifies elderly residents, disabled residents and SEND children as disproportionately affected by the closure of Westdean Library, how can councillors lawfully proceed with a permanent closure without first demonstrating that all reasonable alternatives have been fully explored and transparently costed in a way that satisfies the public sector equality duty?
Well, thanks again. And we are committed to meeting our public sector equality duty, and therefore have explored and described the impact on residents and other stakeholders in detail in the accompanying EIA. The report concludes that actions can be taken with caution.
Final question from Jess Jetmore. We know the savings from closing our library has been estimated at £20,000. Given the school it is attached to doesn't need the additional space, there is no realistic future for this building. If West Dean Library closes, what is the plan if the building sits empty and incurs security, maintenance and deterioration costs that wipe out the claimed saving?
Thank you. Should West Dean Public Library close, discussions will take place with the school about their potential use of the space. Any exploration of other options for future use will consider cost, suitability and practical matters, given this attachment to the school. Thanks very much. And again, thanks for coming along and for your hard work asking the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Ruth's daughter. Great. We will now turn to issues raised by members. These questions can be found published in the addendum. We've got 15 minutes in total set aside for member questions, and once we've reached time, Councillor Robbins.
Sorry, Chair, I do have another public question on my list. I don't know if you've got one from Clyde Bonney.
That person wasn't in attendance today.
Okay, I thought there was another person who wasn't in attendance further down.
No, neither of them are in attendance.
Okay, sorry. Thanks, Ruth.
Once we've reached time, I'll move to the next item, and then any questions we don't come to today, the member in question will receive a written response. We've got 26 member questions for this meeting, so I'll rotate in the normal way through each member to ask 2 of their questions to try and ensure we can accommodate everybody to at least ask something. And then, as I say, anything we won't get to, we'll provide written responses. So I've got a couple of members. I think I've got Councillor Hill and Councillor Shanks online. I've got Councillor Pickett, Councillor Earthy and Councillor Fishley here. I think first up I've got Councillor Fishley.
Thank you. It's about libraries, Rotting Dean Library. We never received a breakdown of how the council came up with the figure of £25,000 to run Rotting Dean Library. Now that figure has increased to £40,000. Please, would you provide a breakdown of this?
Yes, the financial impact of the recommendations is detailed in the accompanying report at point 6. The impact and savings of removing the proposal to close Rotting Dean Library is 30k, which is made up of 25k direct cost and 5k associated management costs. 25k savings were allocated to the proposed closure of Rotting Dean Library. This does not reflect the whole cost of delivering the library service at this location. It includes around 16,000 for library and information officer time, plus some of the running costs for the space, including cleaning and security. As a consequence of rising costs, Rotting Dean Library remaining open, there is likely to be an additional pressure of £10,000 in the next financial year for this library. Therefore, in total, the proposed library savings have been reduced by a total of 40k.
Councillor Fishley, your second question.
I was a little bit confused about your answer. I really was expecting utilities £4,000, salaries 18,000.
Councillor Fishley, your second question, please.
Okay, thank you. My second question is number 6, if that's okay, Trevor. The City Transport Plan, figure 7, on page 146 of the Cabinet report, doesn't show that Rottingdean High Street has congestion and capacity issues. Previous studies have identified the High Street as a problem area, so why is it being excluded in this report for measures to address the issues there?
Thank you, Councillor Fishley. Your question number 6 and number 7 are very similar, so do you mind if I answer both questions in one, if that's okay with you? And the answer applies to both. So figure 7 on page 426 of the Cabinet report. The information is from the DFT traffic counts, which shows average delays as updated annually and publicly available on an interactive map, which I'll send a link for. The 30 to 50 seconds of delay refer to a road link from Rottingdean High Street to Arundel Road. Officers advised that they have made a presentation error on the map, but also applying this to the link west of Rottingdean High Street, and we'll correct this on the version that will go to the Council's website. We sincerely apologise and will ensure this is correct in the final published version report. By means of correction, the data confirms the average delay on the road link from Rottingdean High Street to the city boundary was 76.9 seconds per vehicle per mile in 2023. During peak times, travel times may be expected to be above average. Average delays are a useful way to compare acute congestion on different roads. Average travel times in the A259 are well below those seen in some areas of the city centre, where they're over 200 seconds per vehicle per mile. An objective of our City Transport Plan 2035 is to reduce congestion with priority focus on areas worst affected.
Thanks, Councillor Meaton, and thank you, Councillor Fishley. I'm now going to call Councillor Hill.
Sorry, my question was, why is Rottingdean being excluded from this report, Rottingdean High Street? And you didn't respond. I didn't get a reply on that.
In both the answer to number 6, which includes the exclusion of that road, and number 7, it is because of a presentation error on the map, which we will correct on the final version, which we'll publish. I do apologise.
Thank you, Councillor Meaton, and thank you, Councillor Fishley. We're going to move on.
I just want to recall that is the most ridiculous response. You didn't reply to my answer. Rottingdean isn't included in this report. We have congestion issues and capacity issues. I was asking you about them, and you talk about a presentation error. That report is littered. My one question, you've said that there's 2 errors. It's littered throughout that report.
Councillor Hill, I'm going to invite you to come in with your question.
They'd mute me if I did that. Anyway, the 2 questions I've got on the general fund draft budget and resource update. So am I okay to ask both of them?
Yes, you absolutely are.
Yeah, thanks. So my first question is on page 232, there's a proposal that the £65,000 cemeteries maintenance reserve is to be pooled with other risks under a general risk reserve. It would seem that the future financial position of the council will lead to extreme pressures on general reserve. What reassurances can the administration give that taking away a dedicated maintenance reserve for cemeteries will not harm cemetery maintenance?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Hill, which is an important one, not least because cemeteries are clearly a really important service to the city. It's really important to residents and families. These are sacred spaces where they visit the memorials to loved ones. We've had experiences in the past couple of years where our cemeteries haven't lived up to the standards we expect, and we've taken action to remediate that, and it's really important. First thing to say is we're not removing the cemeteries maintenance budget at all. There's no proposal relating to that. As you say, and as I know you understand, Councillor Hill, this is about accounting for reserves for potential additional needs of maintenance, and the view from finance is that it's not an efficient way to have little pockets of reserves, but to put that within the general risk reserve of the council. So in some senses, it's an accounting change. It is not removing the maintenance budget of cemeteries. And clearly, if there was something completely unforeseen and dangerous that happened in a cemetery, the general risk reserve would have to be called upon to remediate that in a cemetery. Thank you.
Thanks. My second question is on page 131 regarding registration services. It says there will be a, quote, comprehensive transformation of registration services by streamlining processes, optimizing resources, and embedding efficiency into service delivery, risk, and impact. Implications of managing change and challenging old ways of working, potential staffing changes during the transition period, end quote. This very opaque language that does not explain what the proposed changes to registration are, leaving me unsure how the £60,000 savings will be realised. Is this just a long way of saying the administration is cutting jobs in the registration services team?
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hill, for your question on registration services. They're a team that I've really enjoyed working with since becoming a cabinet member. And the short answer to your question is no. We're forecasting an underspend for 2025-26 in this service, driven by income achievement. That means they make more money than they cost, and by the management of staffing vacancies, which we're holding. So going forward into the next financial year and baked into our draft budget proposals, there are several proposed savings. So there's the procurement of new software for managing delivery of appointments and ceremonies. There's reduction in spending on administrative and ancillary costs. And then there's realignment of the service budget to reflect the income achievements that the team have been able to bring into the council. So therefore, the 60k savings proposed that are set out in the report, they're not related to specific staffing numbers or a loss of headcount, but a service-wide redesign is planned to be taken forward in 2026 and has been planned for some time to increase resilience and to rationalise the use of casual staff.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hill. Thanks, Councillor Allen, for the response. I've got Councillor Shanks online.
Thank you. Why has the Cabinet decided to ignore the recommendation from the People's Scrutiny Committee to shelve the library cuts and the subsequent one, which was also unanimous, which was to mothball them even if they're closed? They were both passed unanimously and not mentioned in the report. Actually, they are mentioned in the report, but they're a long way down. So I hadn't read that at the beginning because they're not included in the evidence section at the beginning. Thank you.
Councillor Robbins.
Well, I think you've answered your own question that you asked. We recognise the Scrutiny Committee recommendations have carefully considered their concerns alongside other factors before making our final recommendations to Cabinet today. They are directly referenced in the cover report at point 350. The People and Overview Committee met on Monday the 10th of November 2025 to review the consultation process and responds to the public consultation into proposing changes to the library service. Deputations from the residents and respondents of the committee were heard. The committee made the following recommendations. Recommendations that Cabinet do not proceed with the library's closure plan at this point, referring to all proposals of closure of the service, opening hours reduction, as well as the whole site closure. Recommends that if Cabinet closure chooses to proceed with the library buildings are mothballed until the refreshed library strategy determines the future use of the city libraries. So they are referred to in the report, and they were considered when the report was written. So I think that answers the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Robbins. Councillor Shanks, your next question.
I don't think I've got another question.
Sorry, Councillor Shanks, that's my...
I've got a representation later
error.
on.
Yes, you've got a representation later on. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to Councillor Pickett, who is here with us.
Thank you, Chair. I've only got one question. I think all my other questions have already been covered. As the library service is currently rewriting its current strategy regarding services, finances and forward plans, why can't the proposed closures wait until this strategy is complete so that we have a more thorough idea of how to move forward with possible closures and ways of making savings?
Well, thanks very much for your question. The savings needed to be made in the next financial year and cannot be delayed. The service was allocated a savings target to meet in 25 to 27, and the revenue budget reduction has already been agreed at Budget Council in February 2025. The library services strategy for 26 to 31 will be developed in the next year and will inform future services delivery decisions. The current strategy is still live, and the information of the proposals considered to meet the current saving targets. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pickett and Councillor Robbins. Councillor Hill, I think you wanted to read Councillor Sykes' two questions, and we do have time.
If that's okay, there's also questions from Councillor Macleay. Do you want me to do those two, or what would you prefer?
Why don't you start with Councillor Sykes, because we're taking them in order.
Yeah.
Let's see where we get to with asking his questions and take a view.
Okay, so I think I can only see one from Councillor Sykes. But yeah, to the background, sorry, this is on the budget. To the background of the impact of the cost of temporary accommodation on council budgets, what actions are the administration pursuing to influence the cost of housing to residents, and how is the effectiveness of these actions being monitored?
Great question, really important question. Simple answer is we're buying and building on a greater scale than any previous administration, probably in the last 25 years. The only solution out of the dire housing crisis in this city in the south of England is to build more affordable and genuinely affordable housing. And we're also pursuing a strategy that I know you're aware of, Councillor Hill, of acquiring property, something that has cross-party support, I know, and was pursued under the previous administration. We're now accelerating that. That's purchasing housing into the housing revenue account for long-term tenancies, but also purchasing accommodation to use for temporary accommodation to bring down the financial pressure and give more security to those families facing temporary accommodation. We're also doing a range of other things that the service are pursuing in terms of how they try and purchase, doing longer leases opposed to spot purchase, working with registered providers and charities, and working with our homelessness services to prevent homelessness. How will it be tracked? It will be tracked through the council plan, overall tracking, and budget tracking, places like TBM, and then other cabinet reports that Councillor Williams brings on updates to the overall housing position.
Thanks. I'll ask Councillor Macleay's questions. Hers are on the regulator of social housing response to regulatory judgment, including procurement of stock conditions contractor. So I assume that's for Councillor Williams. Her first question is, are all fire risk assessment reports available for inspection by residents? And if not, when can they be made available?
Thank you for that question, a very important question. Of course, the health and safety of our residents and of those visiting residents or working in their homes, of course, is a key priority for us, and we do remain committed to publishing FRAs. Now, we have undertaken a full new set of fire risk assessments across our 639 blocks in order that we have a complete and up-to-date appraisal of fire risks and remediation requirements. This work is ongoing, and as we all know, particularly in relation to our high-rise blocks, a number of FRAs have been shared with MPs, councillors and residents in response to inquiries. And we want transparent and meaningful information about fire safety to be freely accessible to residents so that sharing is not limited to responding to inquiries. In order to do this, in order to publish our 639 FRAs, in a form that is accessible to residents, our HRA budget planning includes funding an additional resource to focus on FRA publications. And this will be focused on reviewing each and every one with a view to ensuring that the information is published in the public domain, that it helps residents to understand the fire safety arrangements in the home and communal areas. And by taking this approach, we avoid publishing unhelpful information, including technical jargon, for example. And we also really do need to, and we will be, ensuring that any personal or sensitive information about individuals is not inappropriately shared. We look forward to recruiting this resource and supporting them in this important work. Thank you for your question.
Can I ask my last question, or
Yes.
Councillor McClay's last?
Councillor McKay's last question, yes.
Yeah, in a recent report, it stated that the fire safety actions remain high, although it has reduced from 6,420 to 4,855. Of the 4,855 outstanding actions, how many of them are serious breaches? And if there are any serious breaches, how many of them have not been completed within the target remediation date mentioned on the fire risk assessment? We've been awaiting an update since place scrutiny.
Thank you for your question. The Cabinet report is being considered today at this meeting with a lot more detail about that. This has been considered and demonstrates continued positive progress in further reducing the total number of the fire risk assessment remediant actions. And they can be as much as a fire sign that needs updating. It can be a fire door, for example, a fire exit. There are lots of reasons why these remediations are recorded. And some of them serious. Well, we do have serious ones. We have things like waiting watch, for example, that will be there until we get to a point where it's safe not to do so. So they are very mixed. And as of October 2025, this number is now reduced to 2,918, a reduction of more than 60%. Okay. And within this total, the number of total high risk actions fell from 417 to 14. So we are doing really well, I'm very pleased to say, in this. And of these, 9 of the 14 have not been completed to date. So we are awaiting 9 out of those high risk, but they are being completed shortly. The high number of remediation actions follows completion of updated fire risk assessments across all our blocks. And the most common high risk actions identified relate to fire doors, as I said, or replacement signage, communal electric systems, compartmentalisation and ventilation. These themes are consistent across our housing stock and reflect known areas of historic underinvestment. We've established or are in the process of mobilising planned programmes of work to address each of these risk areas. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Councillor Hill, for reading Councillor McClay's questions on housing, and thank you to Councillor Williams for your responses. We now move to representations from opposition members, and the first I have here is from Councillor Urphy. Would you like to present the representation on item 87, our City Transport Plan 2025, please? You have up to 3 minutes to present.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I'm making our opposition representation on agenda item 87 on our City Transport Plan. Please return this plan for urgent corrections, because if you don't, your failure to do so may cause significant damage to our economy. You know we need a new transport plan to access Department for Transport funding, and have been told this plan complies with the DFT's new requirements. Unfortunately, this is not true in some ways and will be all too obvious to the DFT. Indeed, it is most unlikely that DFT will take longer than the 30 minutes taken to spot some of the errors by one of our local residents. I will give you 2 examples of those errors right now. Firstly, we say we had 329 kilotons of CO2e emissions, but this is not the official Department of Energy Security net zero figure of 288 kilotons, because our figure includes traffic outside the city boundary. You can check this for yourselves before you get to item 87 on the agenda. Look at page 3, the plan's carbon baseline. The last 3 lines clearly state that our figures include emissions from outside the city boundary. The DFT absolutely forbids this. Secondly, we say that 36% of our CO2e comes from short car journeys, with the implication that we can tackle this by boosting active travel. By contrast, in their decarbonising transport plan, the DFT calculates a 9% national figure and forecasts a 0.5% savings from active travel. So, if you let them think that we believe 36% of our CO2e comes from short private car journeys, but their national plan uses 9% and expects only 0.5% savings from active travel, right, it will make them seriously question our priorities and our savings predictions. There is absolutely no doubt the DFT will notice these errors. The only doubt will be whether or not they allow us to access any of the major funds released in 26-27 before we correct them. These errors may also make them question whether we did a proper and mandatory consultation in the first place. So when the next round of transport funding is released next year, we will not qualify to receive any unless we have submitted a corrected transport plan. We in Brighton Hove Independence Group want to do our best to help remedy this serious situation quickly, and hence our representation. Engage with us and we can help you correct the plan. I urge you that when discussing agenda item 87, you give due consideration to the financial implications to our city of submitting a plan that the DfT is likely to find seriously substandard. If today you do not return this draft to be corrected, risk delaying the city's £50 million or so in essential funding for the transport improvements that this city so desperately needs. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Councillor Urphy. The further representations I have down are one from Councillor Hill and one from Councillor Shanks. Just want to confirm that that's right. Okay, Councillor Hill, I invite you to make your representation for up to 3 minutes.
Thanks. My representation is on the budget. So firstly, I want to thank the administration for publishing a draft budget this year. It was a shame we didn't get this last time. So now one of the key cost pressures for the council is increasing demand from adult social care services. So just as with the sharp rise in temporary accommodations isn't a unique problem for our council. So nationally, the directors of adult social services estimate there'll be the largest overspend in adult social care budgets at this point of the year in the post-COVID era, with a projected £623 million overspend for the financial year. And significant savings will be required for next year's adult social care budgets, totaling 869 million savings for the 2026 to 2027 financial year. So council's overspending on adult social care isn't about abstract numbers, it's about unmet needs of real people. So I support the words of the chair of the Directors of Adult Social Services when she says that the underfunding of adult social care is forcing councils to make impossible choices, trying to balance financial sustainability with doing the right thing for those who rely on us. And this was highlighted on a local level recently when the council was rated inadequate in assessing people's needs by the Care Quality Commission under Section 50 of the Health and Social Care Act 2008, meaning that the CQC has sent a notification letter to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care outlining the area where improvements are needed. And specifically, this relates to the fact that only 29% of people had their care packages assessed in 2024, which is far below similar local authorities and the legal requirements for our council, although numbers are improving somewhat for this year. Now, this is directly related to the past budget decisions which happened, which were due to previous Conservative government's lack of political will to tackle increased financial pressures in adult social care. But this lack of political will from government persists, however. So the draft budget proposes a total savings for the 2026 to 27 year of £2,296,000 worth of cuts to adult social care. And Labour Council leader and local government chair Louise Gittins highlighted the absence of any reference to adult social care in the budget, despite it being one of the biggest financial challenges facing local government, including our authority. And this shouldn't be a burden this council has to bear. Sadly, resolving this with the National Care Service is not a top priority for this government, and it's not looking to be delivered by this government, albeit they do pay lip service to this. Without this, we're looking at worsening services and higher tax bills for residents. When people see their bills increasing, taxes increasing, and services being cut, they see austerity. Labour councillors have told this isn't austerity because we had a 1% real term increase. However, this 1% includes the 5% council tax increase, which the government is forcing councils to make, including a 2% precinct council tax increase to fund future further adult social care increases. People who rely on care and support, as well as those who provide it, will be understandably worried about the sustainability of services.
Councillor Hill. I'm
given
afraid
no
I'm
new
going to have
funding was
to stop
announced.
you there. Thanks very much. Councillor Shank.
Thank you. I last did a representation about libraries at Cabinet, maybe not the last one, and I felt I wasn't being listened to then, and Cabinet obviously has already made up its mind today about what's happening with libraries. But that was before the last representation, before the scrutiny meeting, and I did feel quite encouraged by the fact that maybe scrutiny could play a role in things when unanimously all the Labour members and all the opposition members voted together to ask you to shelve these plans. Shelve's a good word for libraries, but to wait until the next strategy is being done, because the PFI is coming up for renewal. And it seems like from the representations we've had today as well from residents that Labour, you are not listening to us, opposition, maybe that's understandable, but you're also not listening to your own councillors or to the residents, even though you say that you are a listening council. We are currently at the beginning of this meeting. You said how pleased you are with the government's announcement about youth services. I'm very delighted about that as well. The problem is that all those services were closed down, and it's going to take a lot more than the money that's actually allocated to bring anything back that was there before austerity. Once you close something, you close it. You can't just open it again, which is why we asked if it could be mothballed. You know, we are losing important community libraries. Of course, the usage is low because over the years, the numbers of hours opening have been cut, and then people don't know if it's open or not. Potentially, we could have full opening hours at all our libraries in the future if ever we get local government financing sorted out. But basically, you know, this is a preventative measure. People want community spaces. They want warm, safe places to meet. And they are preventative. You know, Councillor Hill's just talked about adult social care and the crisis facing that. We want people to be able to get out of their house, go to somewhere communal. I was in Jubilee Library on Tuesday night, and, you know, there's a lot of people around in the evening. You've closed one of the evenings now. That means fewer people will be able to go after work or just to stay a bit longer in the warm before going back to having to face the choice about putting their heating on or not. It's a really short-sighted cut. It's a very small amount of money, as you know, from a huge council budget. It doesn't mean that because things are in a budget, they have to happen. Often, in fact, you're overspent this year. So, you know, often those savings aren't achieved, and it would have been perfectly possible to not go ahead with these cuts. And so, you know, this will be something that will go down in your record, and I'm very sorry to see it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Shanks. Just a point of clarification, we didn't overspend our budget this year. Anyway, I'm going to move on.
And sorry, I meant the current budget. I mean, budget often, savings aren't always achieved on every budget heading. That's what I mean. No, they're not always achieved on all budget headings. As you know, as I know all too well, you set a target, it doesn't always achieve.
Well,
Let's move on.
Let's move on. I could say that the last Green administration did overspend the budget and take us even more into our reserves, which is one of the reasons we're so financially constrained. But I won't make that point. I will move on.
That's to do with national budgets, to be honest, generally.
Local
government
finance. Anyway, I'm going to move on, Councillor Shanks. I'm going to move on. Right, we're going to our first report, which is targeted budget management, month 7. And I'm going to ask Councillor Taylor to introduce the report.
Well, it's good timing, and I hope Councillor Shanks stays, because we're going to talk about roughly the same subject that she just finished on, national funding. Targeted budget management is our intra-year process of monitoring how we're getting on delivering our in-year budget. In other words, are we on track, are we underspending, are we overspending, for month 7, which is where we are in the financial year. Before I get into the detail, I want to take a step back and talk about local government finance overall and the model of how we finance and the services that we deliver. Councils are funded in a number of different ways, and it is relatively complex, the different income streams that we have as a council. On top of that, many of the income streams that we receive are segregated for specific use. So the two biggest standalone ones are schools funding, where we get something like £200 million of funding from the DFE that goes almost straight to schools based on their per pupil allocation. And that is funding that can only be used for schooling, or some of it is used for the education department within the council, but that's segregated. And then clearly the next one is housing revenue account, whereby the rents that we get from our tenants can only be used within the housing revenue account for either servicing those tenants in those buildings or acquiring and building new housing revenue account properties. We can't use the rents to fund other elements of frontline service. So what we're left with, and what we often refer to in the council, is our general fund. And our general fund are the unring-fenced amount of money that we have as a residual for which we have to use to provide the other general services of the council. And we often talk about the net general fund as the most meaningful figure of the overall budget that as a council we have the levers to pull on, the decisions to make on that. Now, what I want to talk about first is our overall funding picture, and we have some really interesting statistics that I'm going to share with all councillors. They haven't been published in this paper, but we're going to publish them in advance of the budget that talks to the point that Councillor Shanks was making. It's quite difficult to compare what your government grant funding is versus your income from other streams versus your tax income. So what we generally do is we come up with this figure, which is the net general fund, and that is our overall resources that we have as a council, as I say. Now, we often hear, and we've heard it today from Councillor Hill, about whether we're pursuing further austerity, which is really interesting when you look at the figures. So we've got figures that go back to 2010 that look at the overall net general fund of this council. We've been a unitary authority from long before that, so it's comparing on a like-for-like basis. And they're really quite stark, the figures that come out, because we talk about real terms cuts to services and real terms cuts to the funding of local government. But in the period post-2010, we actually saw a number of years where we didn't have real term cuts to local government, we had cash cuts to local government. We actually had our funding going down in cash terms and therefore hugely in real terms for a number of years. And there's some really, really stark years. 2012, 13, sort of 1 and a bit years into the Tory and Lib Dem austerity government, our funding went down 9 million year on year versus 232 million. That's a 4% drop and a 7% real terms cut. A couple of years later, 2014, it went down 2 million. That was a real terms cut and a cash cut. 2015, it went down nearly 10 million versus a now reduced general fund of 215 million pounds. Throughout that whole period of austerity, at one point our general fund got down to £200 million, having started the decade at £230 million. So just let that sink in, the actual cash and real term cuts that happened in this city and that residents we had to live through and successive administrations had to deal with. And now let's compare it to the situation that we now have with our overall funding. And I accept the point that part of that is not the direct government funding, part of it is changes in council tax, and by the way, increases in our council tax base. So if we have more properties in the city, and we are building more properties, you'll have more people paying council tax. But let's have a look what's happened in the last year and the forthcoming year. Last year, our net general fund went up £18.4 million. That was the increased funding envelope that we had last year. That was a percentage change of 7.49% in cash terms. If you compare that to measures of inflation, that's a 3.7% real terms increase. So I wasn't quite sure where Councillor Hill got the 1% increase related to. Perhaps she was comparing it to council tax as well. But our overall budget as a council went up 7.4% in cash terms and 3.7% in real terms. This year, and we're looking forward to, in the next paper, talking about next year's budget and how we set a budget for next year. We don't know our final figure yet. We're going to get that next week from government, but we estimate it to be going up by about £16 million. So again, a cash increase of about 6.5% and a real terms increase of about 3%. So there's a really stark difference to what we're seeing now, which is year on year cash and real terms increases versus a decade of grueling austerity where £30 million over a decade was cut in cash terms from our actual budget, and the real terms decreases were even starker than that. So that's the overall funding position. Now we step forward to where we are as a council and how we're looking on an in-year basis. And the thing to draw out and really try and understand as a council is that councils are obviously not like either a private sector organisation or even really a charity in many ways, because you would say, well, our funding's going up in cash terms, our funding's going up in real terms, so therefore we'll probably be all right, we'll increase, so we'll do some new things here and we might change our services around, but we're actually growing what we're doing and the services that we can provide. Unfortunately, councils are very different because we have statutory obligations, and we have to provide statutory services. In other words, we can't turn away, and nor would we want to, we can't turn away certain service users and providing the services that they're entitled to. And so that leads to a funny position, or a very difficult and challenging position, if you have increases in the demand and complexity for those services. And that is what this council, and many others, but this council faces. We have three key areas of increased demand and complexity that we're facing. The first is homelessness in the city and temporary accommodation. The second is adult social care, and then the third, to a lesser degree but still important and to be discussed, is children's social care and children's social services. Now, why have we got such pressure on homelessness and temporary accommodation? The answer to that is because the housing market in this country is fundamentally broken. We have one of the richest countries in Europe. We're something like the 25th or 26th richest country in the world by head of population, and yet we have thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of people in the country who are homeless and being accommodated in temporary accommodation by their local authority. A scandalous, ludicrous and obscene position for us to be in. Now, why are we in that position? Now, my view on that, and I would say this as a Labour politician, but I believe it to be true, is the succession of two policies, which is in the 1980s, the privatisation of most of our industries and the sell-off of our council stock via right to buy, and a government who were not interested in investing in affordable housing. Then you layer on the austerity that I've just described, the cuts to the frontline services that people rely on from Tory austerity, the national cuts to education, to health, to other elements of public services that support families on modest working incomes. And then you add on to that the private nature of our housing market, which we have a high level of landlord ownership in this country, and we haven't been building social housing over the last 40 years. And bingo, you've got a homelessness crisis, one of the worst in Europe. And so those are the pressures that we are dealing with as a council. And that's the cause of the pressure that we see in our in-year budgets. It is not that the council is looking to cut, nor is it that the government is underfunding or funding less than previous years. They're increasing the funding, but the pressures are overwhelming to our general fund, and that's the position that we face, and that's the issue that we have to deal with on an in-year basis and on a go-forward basis. Last thing on the national picture, just to flag, is that the solution to these issues cannot be, and nor is it progressive to argue, that the solution to this crisis is just to throw more and more money at private landlords to accommodate people in temporary accommodation. They'll ask for 10% next year, 15% next year. Just keep throwing cash, cash, cash. That isn't the way to solve the issue. The way to solve the issue is to fix the underlying housing market, which is what the government is doing by allocating the largest amount of capital, 39 billion over 10 years, for affordable and social housing, which is now already trickling through. We have the first round of funding open, and why councils need to, and why we're leading the way on it, in acquiring properties into council ownership, buying and building new properties into council ownership, which will increase the stock of affordable housing and will try to fix the underlying nature of the market that we face. But in the meantime, we have to be open and transparent about the pressures that we therefore face and the financial challenge that we face in year. In terms of that financial challenge, what the report sets out is that in month 7, we have a forecast overspend risk of £7.7 million. Now that has come down a bit, but it is worth acknowledging that that is still a relatively high forecast in-year position. If we look at table 4.3, or the chart in section 4.3, we'll see that at month 7 versus the previous 3 years, it is a high position. It's higher than the previous 2 years, although last year it did end up ticking up a bit higher in month 8. And so it represents a very, very significant challenge. And it represents a doubly significant challenge in that many of the measures we took last year in terms of spending controls and vacancy controls are already in place. So we don't necessarily have some of the additional levers to pull to get us into the right place. If I step back to 4.1, the table there shows by directorate the sources of those pressures. And as I said, they come from 3 areas. The biggest and largest is homes and adult social care, which covers both the homelessness budgets of the council and the adult social care budgets, and that's an 8.2 million pressure versus our budgeted position. Families, children and wellbeing, smaller but still notable, which is 1.4 million pressure versus the budget. Now, in other areas of the council, the areas that we sort of have more control over because it's not dependent on demand, we're actually underspending. So city operations, which is most of our core front-facing operations like transport, weeds, graffiti, keeping the city clean, etc., we're actually on budget or under budget in many areas. Mainly that's because of good income in some areas, and central budgets are also underspent. I want to turn to Appendix 4, which just brings alive a little bit what I'm saying. If we turn to Appendix 4 and the section under Housing People Services, which is temporary accommodation, just to bring alive what I mean by the pressure on homelessness and temporary accommodation. What that sets out is what we're seeing in year. At the beginning of the year, when we set the budget, we assumed 193 households would be having nightly spot purchased accommodation. Now, overall, we have about 2,000 households at the moment that are homeless and temporary accommodation in the city, a moral scandal, as I've said. Of that, we had assumed 100 or 200 odd would be having to do night spot purchased accommodation, which is our most expensive and difficult to predict way of securing that because of the overall increase and because some landlords have been leaving the market. We're now forecasting about 600 households having to be purchased in that way, which represents the main pressure on the council. It's nearly £5 million of pressure. And then similarly, there's also an increase in the booked accommodation. When we block book accommodation, you have a better chance of getting a price that will then meet the income we get from housing benefit, and so therefore it would be budget neutral for the council. But again, there we had assumed 317 units. We're now facing about 450 units having to be booked in that way. So that just gives you a sense of the scale and what is driving our overall pressures. Versus overall, the council in its non-demand budgets is actually underspending or on budget. I just want to finish by sort of giving an overall view on where we are, which is we are in a very, very difficult position. It is worth noting that we've done two things in previous years. We have been repaying our overall reserves on the council, our working balance, at a quicker rate than was previously even recommended by the Chief Financial Officer. When we've been having underspends in the 2 years that we've been managing the finances, and in what we've budgeted and planned for, we have been building back up our general reserves of the council. That clearly puts us in a stronger position versus the underlying pressure that we have. We also this year allocated a new risk reserve of £1.7 million because we knew the budget that we had set last year would be tricky because it involved managing some of those frontline services. So there is that additional risk reserve. On top of that, officers are working extremely hard across all those service areas and in other service areas to find innovative ways to, as quickly as possible, solve some of those housing issues and be able to purchase the accommodation in a way that brings down the overall general fund costs. So I want to thank officers for all the work they're doing. There's still a long way to go in the financial year. It is going to be very tricky, but I want to be very clear the decisions we've made in previous years to build up our reserves and allocate that risk reserve does put us in a better position than what we inherited when we took over the administration in May 2023. So that's a summary of TBM7, Chair, and clearly in future months we will get further TBM reports and updates to see how we're tracking into year end. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Taylor. Can I have questions and comments from members on anything that Councillor Taylor has presented or anything in the report? Councillor Williams.
Thank you. I seem to be the bearer of bad news often with our housing crisis, and something that I've been concerned about for many years. I will say there is light at the end of the tunnel. We are bearing the brunt at the moment, and this is at the moment looking it's the darkest hour for councils everywhere. We hope and we know that our plans will change this in our city and hopefully across the nation. The Renters' Right Act will significantly help us. People don't realise that a high proportion of our homeless families in particular are because of Section 21s. During COVID, way back, I know we don't want to talk about it too much, but one of the highlights of that was when we stopped the use of Section 21 during that time. We as a council had a reprieve from people coming to us for homelessness. So we know that this can work for us and it can happen. And of course, it's not the be all and end all, it won't solve everything, but it's a start. And I think that we are going in the right direction. The government is looking at investing significant amounts of money in house building, genuinely affordable homes, not just any old homes. So this will take time. But in the meantime, we've got to bed and we've got to make these decisions. But what I'm saying is there is light at the end of the tunnel. We just have to keep soldiering on. And thank you for the work that's being done.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. And it's good to finally hear that people are identifying the right problems. The cost of housing is ridiculous, and I think it always has been ridiculous. And I'm somebody who can remember times in the 70s and 80s when it was all anybody talked about, how much their house was worth and how much. Think of the very term we use. We talk about people getting on the housing ladder, which suggests that you're at the bottom and you work your way up and work your way up, always dependent upon what you've got rising in value and you being able to take the next step. And of course, it was always going to be the case that sooner or later that well run dry. You know, you was going to get to a stage where you couldn't get on the bottom run to move up the ladder. So even those on the ladder, it dries up for. So it's great that I think we're finally with Councillor Taylor and Councillor Williams identifying and attempting to put right the right problem, rather than tampering around the edges and trying to find easy fixes all the time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Robbins. Councillor Robbins.
Thank you, Chair. I note in the Cabinet, in the report, there's a forecast overspend on the ring-fence dedicated schools grant of 2.4 odd million. As a school governor, I'm really pleased to see that the Department of Education has confirmed the extension of the statutory override until March 2028. And there have been further announcements in the recent budget where we've been promised government pledges to absorb SEND costs from 28-29. So that's all positive news from our Labour government.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Indeed. Any other comments or questions from members? Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I remember being really disappointed when we allocated our underspend from the last financial year to our reserves. It seemed like a very boring thing to do when we could have ploughed it into our parks or our street cleaning services or our cultural services and got a good headline. But really, we've put it in the bank for a rainy day, knowing there is a cloud coming towards us. And now we are looking up at this very dark cloud. So it's absolutely the right thing to do. Our reserves were not left in a healthy place when we took over. And it's something that certainly when I'm in bed at night staring at the ceiling, it's something that comes across in my mind, how our reserves almost match our overspend. And all there needs to be is another pandemic or another unexpected event, and we're in really serious trouble. So that's why it's something that's really at the forefront of our administration's mind, and it's something we'll keep working on, and I think needs to be at the forefront of all of our minds when going forward and setting budgets.
Thanks, Councillor Allen. And just reflecting what you say, I think it's absolutely the case that prudent financial management in politics and in running a local authority doesn't get you the favoured headlines, and it certainly doesn't get you the sort of political boost that I think some other political parties look for and predominantly look for. But it's absolutely essential to the long-term viability of this council and for the services that our residents rely on. There is nothing progressive. There is nothing to be celebrated about a council going into financial crisis. That's when the really bad decisions get made. That's where we as local representatives would potentially lose control over decision making, unable to represent our residents' views and to try and make decisions in their best interests. And I think it's a really important point to reflect on, that it's not always the popular thing, it's definitely not always the easy thing, but managing this council's budget responsibly and appropriately in the long-term interests of every resident in the city is absolutely what we must do. I think I had another point over here from Councillor Miller.
You said most of what I was going to say. I think just wanted to echo that and to say again how fantastic it is that we have the team led by Councillor Taylor and the officers who support us in delivering prudent financial management in challenging circumstances, because as you say, it is not progressive for us to be profligate. It just ends up destroying our city's future. So I'm just I just want to commend them for the amazing work they're doing, and I hope that gradually as money from central government goes up, these decisions become easier. But thank you very much for all the hard work you're doing.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Any other comments or questions? I'm going to come to our Chief Exec, Jess Gibbons.
Thank you, Chair. I don't often speak at Cabinet, but I think it's important I do on this item, and I'll segue into the next item which follows. I think I wanted to emphasise the seriousness of our financial situation, the in-year pressures, and balancing the medium-term financial plan, which is really serious. And it's a severity that hits all of local government nationally. We're not the only ones struggling with this and working through the pressures. I am particularly concerned about our in-year pressure because of what Councillor Taylor says about the housing pressures we're seeing in temporary and emergency accommodation. That makes it very different from previous years, where we haven't had that very clear pressure from one area coming in. And I think we should all be note of that. I always want to remind us all that it is every officer's and every member's responsibility that we come in budget and that we make sure we balance the medium-term financial plan. It is a team effort for all of us together. And I know you are all, and all officers are working really hard towards balancing the position in year. I know that is creating a huge amount of pressure in the organisation as people hold back spend and think really creatively and innovatively. And I wanted to thank all members and officers, particularly in that space. We have known all year, our peer review in March made a real clear point that financial sustainability was critical, as has our external auditor. And I think we have all been working really hard to try and address that, but the wider position has not helped us. There is a way forward, and I think as we go into the next paper, we will start to see some of that, even though we still have a gap to close. But I do believe financial sustainability is possible for this council, but it will take serious transformation and transforming to a new operating model, one where we invest in digital, where we invest in technology, and we look at how can we be more productive as a council, getting more from all of our resources. And one of our critical resources is our officers and the officer time, and we've got to be really aware of that and how we use that and how we spend it. But I do think that is the way forward. It is going to take a huge amount of work and a huge amount of bravery for us to get there, and we've got to do that together as one team. In the short term, the corporate leadership team are taking an emergency response to the temporary accommodation situation. We are meeting weekly to actually review and look at that and keep track of it. And I wanted to provide you that reassurance that we are absolutely taking this seriously and trying to bring forward quick decisions to be able to address those pressures. But it is really challenging. And at the heart of all of this is actually meeting the needs of our residents and doing that kindly and compassionately. And I think it's important we keep an eye on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jess, for that contribution. Any other comments, questions, reflections from members? If not, can I ask Cabinet to accept the recommendations as detailed in this report? Agreed. Thank you, colleagues. I'm now going to move on to the General Fund Draft Budget and Resource Update 26, 27 to 29, 30. And I'm going to ask Councillor Taylor again to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. And clearly this report follows on from the previous report. This is now looking at our future financial position, as you've set out, and it's a general fund update and resource update for 26 to 2030. It also includes the publication of a draft budget for the forthcoming financial year. As Councillor Hill says, we want to be able to publish draft budgets as early as possible. There's a decent argument that we shouldn't really have done it this year because we don't actually have our final government settlement, but we felt it was best to publish a draft, allow scrutiny to look at a set of proposals as early as possible. Clearly, we'll then get our final settlement and we will understand our true final position that we need to close a gap on next year. So let me just recap where we are and where we've got to as is set out in the report. In July, we published an MTFS that set out a budget gap of £40 million for next financial year. What we have today discussing and what has been published is that financial gap has come down from £40 million to £24.9 million. And the drivers of that are set out on page 5.4, section 5.4. And what that sets out is that the previous gap of £40 million has been reduced to £24 million because of a couple of different things. In summary, the two main drivers of that reduction in gap is the pressures that we've been talking about, that we've just been covering on homelessness, on adult social care and children's social care. Officers working with cabinet members and other members to find mitigations to those pressures. So ways of ensuring that we don't see those pressure come through, and whether that's about accommodation and provision of that, whether that's about front door management of users coming into the service, we are reducing those overall forecast pressures. That's not a cut, not a saving, that's reducing our estimate of what the pressures will be. The second, which is significant, is a reduction in our overall employer pension contribution. And I want to be really, really clear, that is not us cutting our pensions that are available to employees, and that was not even driven by us, that is driven by the East Sussex Pension Fund, who have done a valuation of the overall fund, of which there are many other, in fact, councils that are part of that fund. And they're saying that the fund is actually overvalued at the moment, and so the contributions from all of the different district, borough and county councils can reduce a bit. And so that's a helpful 6 million less that we have to contribute. It makes no difference to the pensions that employees will receive as and when they retire. So that brings the overall gap down to 24.9 million. What we have set out today in our draft budget is a set of savings proposals that total £2.44 million, and that leaves a remaining budget gap as it currently stands based on our estimates of government funding of £12.48 million. As I say, we understand we will get from government next week our final settlement. We'll see if that improves at all versus our assumption. We will then, and already are, working on further mitigations and savings or interventions to close the gap, and we will publish our final budget something like the 1st of February to go to first Cabinet for us to discuss, and then full Council for all members to discuss, debate and vote on to set our budget for the forthcoming financial year. As a reminder to members and to the public, the Council has no option other than to set a balanced budget. We cannot set a budget that says, well, we're 10 million short, that's what we do for now, and we'll borrow against it, or we'll figure it out as we go. We must set a legally balanced budget at the end of February that balances the income that we receive and the services that we're going to provide. Section 5.9 just talks a little bit about some of the things that Jess talked about in the previous section, which is, we know we've got these service pressures. Our overall funding is going up, and in this year and the previous year, reasonably significantly, our funding is going up, but the pressures on our services are meaning that we've got these budget gaps going forward in future years. Now, what do we want to do to remediate that? Well, we don't want to cut frontline services. What we want to do is make efficiencies and savings. And by the way, in the last 2 years that we've had as administration, we've had the two biggest budget gaps in the history of this unitary authority. And yes, there were some difficult decisions made, but the vast, vast majority of closing of those budget gaps has been achieved through savings, innovation, restructuring staff, doing things differently, providing services in the same way to the customer but in a more efficient way. Now, all of those things are difficult and can't be depended on, because sometimes in year things go wrong versus what the plan is. But we have been doing everything we can over 2 years to close those budget gaps by doing the efficiency, the behind the doors stuff, to make sure the council can still protect as many frontline services as we possibly can. And by the way, investing in and expanding new services, including food waste, including playgrounds, including leisure facilities, including resurfacing more roads than any previous year for 10, 15 years. Now, what 5.9 sets out is, well, how are we going to continue doing that? How are we going to continue reducing our overall cost but providing good services? One of them is to look at the capital programme. We have a capital programme that goes out many years and says what things are we going to invest in. If the things that will be naturally delayed, or if the things that we can do more efficiently, or things that we can fund in different ways, that will bring down our overall borrowing costs in our capital programme and will help the general fund. Transformation and innovation is really important, as Jess mentioned. If we can invest in bits of technology, in systems, in equipment, by the way, frontline equipment, in parks, recreation, waste and recycling, that means we can collect things or cut things or improve things more efficiently. That will mean less overall resource required, but still a good service. So the transformation and innovation bit is really, really important. And I think if we're honest with ourselves as a council, we're not in a perfect place in the way technology works. We're not in a perfect place in the way technology faces our residents. It's not the easiest thing to necessarily renew various licenses, not the easiest thing to apply for certain things always. So the more efficient we get in the way we use technology, the lower our costs will be to customers. The third is asset management, and I want to be really clear and transparent that asset management in this council is a really important part of fixing our budget position in the medium term. The council is a very, very significant property owner in this city. We have a large commercial portfolio, we have a large operational portfolio, and we have a large agricultural portfolio and other pieces of land. Now, part of that is about saying, if we have a building that is no longer required for whatever reason, for whatever operational reason, can we convert that into housing and make a saving on TA, and also obviously house families? But it's also about thinking about the cost of our operational footprint. Having half-empty buildings costs lots of money. And that money, if we can make savings on it, can go back into protecting the frontline services. So looking at our asset footprint is really key to be able to solve this issue. And it also means where we do sometimes, as a last resort, after those two things, dispose of a property, i.e. sell it and get a capital receipt from it, we can use that capital receipt to do the bit that I just mentioned, which is the investing in technology to make us more efficient and productive as a council. And then the other bit that we mentioned here is the benchmarking. So looking at other councils and where we have high and low cost bases, and learning from them and trying to improve our overall position. I therefore want to turn to Appendix 1 in the report, which is indeed our draft budget for 26-27. I'm not going to go through everything line by line in the appendix because that would take hours. And of course, as Cabinet, we have reviewed all of this before publishing the budget, and where we'll go through that in detail is in the scrutiny meeting that will happen in January, where opposition councillors and Labour councillors will scrutinise the details of the savings. I want to be very clear that the 12.4 million are savings. These are largely savings and efficiencies. These are not cuts in the way people would think of cuts. I just want to take very quickly through the headline picture, which is of that 12.4 million, 1.2 million comes from families, children and well-being, 7.4 million comes from homes and adult social care, 1.6 million comes from city operations, and 2.1 million comes from central services, things like HR, finance, property law etc. As I say, I'm not going to go through every line in the appendix, but I do want to just draw out a few key items to bring it to life. It's worth noting that in families, children and well-being, a good number of the savings are actually funding switches. They're about finding other pots of money to continue supporting existing services, including how do we use our public health grant in the most sensible way to support the public health objectives of the city, including supporting our young people and children. Within housing and adult social care, the largest area of our pressure, and therefore the largest area where we need to look at savings and efficiencies, a few things to draw out. There's a large focus on community re-enablement, as a sort of preventative measure and helping people get the support they need so they don't have to have other types of services. There's a continued focus on trying to meet the care needs of individuals in their home setting that Councillor Shanks talked about earlier in a slightly different context. If we then move on to temporary accommodations, we say the main pressure that's facing this council, the pressure that we are putting into the budget at the moment is to say that our current temporary accommodation homeless budget would increase by £12 million is the forecast for next year. To put that into context, the current budget is £8 million for homelessness and temporary accommodation. So it's more than doubling in net terms. In gross terms, it's way higher than that, but we obviously get housing benefit from our tenants that pays for some of the costs. So the net cost is the cost after housing benefit to the council. That is forecast to go from £8 million this year to £20 million next year, so a 12 million increase. What we set out here in the appendix is a plan to reduce that pressure by £5.1 million. That's a big chunk of our overall savings and efficiencies. And we're doing that not by kicking people out and saying we can't have a home, but actually by investing in the properties to get people into secure accommodation, investing in homelessness prevention, and working on ways to recover our costs. A number of the other services, I would say, within city operations are smaller in nature because we don't have the big structural pressures. The starting point within city operations is how can we be more commercial? We have services in the city that are essentially commercial. We run a Brighton Centre. We run one of the largest events programmes for a small city in England. How do we use those services to generate more commercial income for the council? In many ways, that's income from people coming from out the city that then supports the overall services of the council. So clearly that's a big focus because it's a win-win for everybody in terms of protecting frontline services. And also having a city that has great events. And then lastly, I just want to touch on Central Hub. Now, Central Hub is not really frontline services. It's largely the in-house services of the council. But we have to be really clear these things are really, really important. It's so important that we have a good finance team, a good legal team, a good procurement team, a good HR team, so that we can be an effective council. But we are looking to have smaller savings across a range of different areas within those services, and also digital innovation and efficiencies. And there will be further savings to come in our next iteration of the budget, where we will have a big focus on work that Councillor Allen and senior officers have been leading on technological innovation. We'll be trying to put a number against that as a saving in future years of how much of the investment in digital and equipment being able to yield in budget savings for next year. So with that, Chair, I will stop there and happy to take comments or questions. But to recap, we've published a draft budget with 12.4 million of savings. Our current estimate is there is a residual gap to go of a further 12.4 million. We will get our settlement next week, and in the coming weeks and months, we will finalise our budget that we will aim to publish at the beginning of February next year. Thank you.
Many thanks, Councillor Taylor, for that really comprehensive explanation of where things currently stand and our projections. Can I take comments and questions from colleagues? Councillor Alexander.
Mine's more of a comment. As a Cabinet member covering adult social care, I just wanted to say that Councillor Taylor touched on it already, but the savings proposal for the adult social care services really are focused on prevention, early intervention and promoting independence. And the proposals will also support our Care Quality Commission improvement journey. So the savings for adult social care are very much people and their needs focused.
Thanks, Councillor Alexander. That's really reassuring to hear and to also see the progress that's already been made in terms of responding to that report from the CQC. Any other comments or questions from colleagues? Councillor Okins.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, just picking up from the comments of Councillor Taylor there about innovation and perhaps sort of having a bit more of a commercial angle on some of the activities that the council is engaged in. There's a few in my area relating to environmental services and the general look and feel of the city, and some of them are quite sizable. In fact, some people may have seen recently that Councillor Allen actually had the good fortune of going out and trialling a laser graffiti removal device. We're in the middle of looking at a business case for that, which would enable us to remove graffiti in all weathers, not just when it's clement. And also to, essentially, at the moment we have an approach to graffiti where we say to our businesses, look, there's graffiti on your building, we'd like you to remove it, please. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If they don't, we go around and say, well, you really must remove it because otherwise we're going to give you a fine. Actually, what we're moving to now is something where we'll say, okay, you need to remove it, but hey, we might come around with our laser and remove it for you, and this is what it might cost. And offering that as a commercial service, which of course then has the opportunity to start having a kind of self-fulfilling element to it, whereby we might actually potentially be able to grow the team and offer a better service more broadly. So that's certainly something that we're looking at. For the 73,000 and counting households that now have a weekly food waste collection in the city, those residents will have received, along with their starter packs with all their caddies and stuff, they will have received a leaflet reminding them that we offer a garden waste collection service. And actually, since those going out, we've seen quite a significant uptick in people subscribing to that service. And we've got a very, we're blessed to have a very large cohort of very talented and very capable officers. And there's one officer in particular who leads on the sort of commercial aspects of our collection service, specifically, garden waste, but specifically also trade waste. Over the last few years, he's taken our trade waste service that we offer to our businesses in the city from making a loss to now turning over just short of £1 million a year. And that trajectory, and he's continually setting himself more and more ambitious targets. So there's it's not even a saving; it's an income generation of potentially £340,000 that's gone into this draft budget. And just one other thing on events, we often find ourselves talking about events in this city. They're one of the things that makes the city amazing, but they do also provide significant sort of cost pressures on us. One of the things that we've been looking at as part of this budget setting process is, actually on some of our larger events, some of them do actually still cost us money to complete the sort of clean up and the waste management and everything from it. So if we can get to a place where we're confident we're fully recovering those costs via the event organisers and sponsors and so on, that is an additional potential saving or rather income generation of about £100,000. So just that's £500,000 worth of money that's come into the council. That's not a saving, it's not a cut, it's not a fine, it's not a tax. It's just having that more commercially minded sort of focus on it. So I just wanted to highlight those for you as an example of that.
Thank you, Councillor Okins. Councillor Meaton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Taylor, for your presentation and the very hard work by all the officers. In your presentation, you referenced the MTFS was in the summer 40 million budget gap. That's down to 24.9 million. So we've reduced that by 15.1 million, which is to credit of a lot of hard work in that respect. You've then found savings proposed, identified of 12.446 million. Remaining, we're given a remaining gap of 12.48 million. Now this, as you rightly say, is in the context of the two previous years where the biggest budget gaps have been addressed through very careful savings and efficiencies and absolutely right. Financial responsibility is central to this administration, and I do credit officers and yourself, Councillor Taylor, and all here present to taking that forward in this way. But I think it's also absolutely correct to ensure that our house is in order, and we do make sure that our delivery of the services that the residents of this city are done effectively and efficiently as we can, and use of the assets that we do have. And I value and credit the opportunity for transformation and innovation. In one way, we just launched the digital residence parking permit, which is over a course of the next 12 months, or started in November. The move to a more digital platform, which actually serves residents better, and it makes it more effective. And we will look at ways to bring other parking permits onto that digital platform to test what we have and make sure it works effectively. The other thing to perhaps note, you touched on this in your presentation. We're actually doing more on things like our road resurfacing, and that's because we get central government funds, grants for certain activities, and it's very welcome that the new Labour government came in and recognised the need for increased grant funding for highways maintenance across England, and including 1.6 million additional funding for this. And I think I want to highlight that point, is that residents might see we're spending more on roads and not on something else, and that's because we have specific grant pots for specific activities such as highways maintenance. So I do want to credit all the work that's gone in here. It's a tough ask, and there will be impacts on services to deliver this, but to balance the books and to serve our city well through doing so, through efficiencies and good management of the assets and the teams that we have are central. So I want to thank you for this and to recognise the challenge that we have going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Meaton. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. And I thank Councillor Rokins for his preface. If the Greens hadn't overspent their last budget by £3 million, I could have bought a lot more laser beams for many departments. But when we're funded better, then I can revisit the laser beams. But going back to the budget proposals, and Councillor Taylor made a very good introduction on digital innovation, which I'm leading on, and I'm bringing a paper on to our next Cabinet meeting, so please do all come back. It's an area where really we're driving both improvements in some of the easy tasks, which we can easily automate and make use of digital services, but also the other end of the scale, a lot of the complex work, which needs a lot of untangling, like using predictive analytics to better deploy packages for adult social care and homelessness help. Now, that's not just a budget saving, that's a really good service that a council is providing to the people of our city. So I'll be bringing more on that in January, but I'm good to see that approach baked into our budget, because it's absolutely right and long overdue. I also think it's worth articulating how, as a political administration, we have made the decision, instead of just going and closing all public toilets, we're looking at where we can tighten things and make efficiencies and reallocate different budgets from different areas and make savings and efficiencies that way. As the Cabinet Member for Customer Services, I was speaking recently and briefing councillors on how in the last 6 months this organisation received over 92,000 phone calls. Now that takes up a lot of officer time, answering 92,000 phone calls. So all the time we can direct those who are able to instead self-service via our online systems. That's saving officer time to do other things and progress other work. So delivering those kind of goals and driving savings and efficiencies in that way, I think is not only good for our staff and for our residents, but is a good way of protecting frontline services, which we don't want to see scaled back, like our public toilets.
Thanks very much, Councillor Allen. Any other comments or questions or reflections at this point on the draft budget? No? Excellent. In which case, I propose that we agree the recommendations that are detailed in the report. Does the Cabinet agree? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you, colleagues. We now move on to our next report this afternoon, which is Sustainability Plan for Libraries. And I'm going to ask Councillor Robbins to introduce this report, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And before we move into the report and the slides that we have to show, there's a couple of comments that I'd like to make. Firstly, I'd really like to thank the officers who were involved. I come into this late in the day and they really have offered me as much support as I could possibly have asked for at what has been a really difficult time. And I can't stress, in all my time as a councillor, have I found anything as difficult as this. And you know, to hear people say, well, it's easy, what you've got to do is just do this or just do that, as if it doesn't, you know. And I think of the nights I've laid awake worrying about how we go about it. Anyway, that's enough about that. And I think we've illustrated. I know it seems to people this is in some cases very small amounts, but I think the last hour or so's discussion has illustrated the problems we're in, and how you know, what seems a very small amount. And in my time, we would have said, oh well, look, it's only this, it's only that. Don't worry about it. It's not worth the aggro. We're now really firing on fumes, and every bit we can do. I'm a bit disappointed about the questions from the opposition. I know this report runs to very nearly 200 pages, but it would appear that they're asking questions having not even bothered to read the report or not. And I know in the Cabinet papers before us today, there's just south of 1,000 pages. So I know there's a lot to look at and there's a lot to get through. But if you're going to ask a particular question, I think it's, you know, you should scrutinise the report that you're going to ask that question about. You know, to ask a question and say this doesn't even appear in the report, and then answer your own question and say, oh yes, it does. I found it now. You know, is not really very respectful to the people who have spent all those hours writing the report. So I'm disappointed in that. And lastly, I'm going to read something because I know we've been asked by someone there, and if we take the decision to close Westdean Library today, council officers will continue to work with Westdean Primary School and anyone that comes forward from the local community to explore options for an alternative community-based provision, including consideration of the possible use of community interest levy receipts if these are requested. Any such provision, if arranged, will not be part of the council's statutory service. So I think it's important that we make that point. Even though if we make the decision today, there is still manoeuvrable room if people want to come forward with alternative suggestions. So I don't know if we could then move on to the slides, and we'll just run through the slides that we've seen times before and then get to the recommendations. Is that possible?
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Robbins, are you expecting slides?
Yes, we've got some slides if we... All right, Keris, I've just been telling everyone how brilliant you were.
They can invite me to the Teams meeting.
Oh, am I doing it from here? Sorry.
No, you're all right.
They're not going to come up on the screen.
I think they are.
They are.
I think we're just going to invite
Oh, should... That's the opening cover, so we don't need that one. We can move on. And here are the original proposals and the final recommendations. So on the left we can see originally what was proposed at Jubilee Library, 2 hours Monday evening between 5 and 7. There's reduction in opening hours. 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon between 2 and 5. Hove for 2 hours on a Wednesday evening, 5 p.m. till 7 p.m. 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon, 2 till 5. And the closure of Hollandbury and Westdean Library and Rottingdean. That has now changed, and we're now going to retention of Hollandbury Library with a commitment to scope alternative community-led options in the future, and we're going to review that in 12 months' time. So we move on. And this is just to lay out the process that we followed. When the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, the guidelines they state, if a local authority wishes to make changes to the library provision, the service should be able to demonstrate plans to consult the local community alongside an assessment of their needs, consideration of a range of options to sustain library service provision in their area, and a rigorous analysis and assessment of the potential impact on their proposals. So this is the recommendations we followed, and I think if you think about that, I mean, that is a really good thing, because what it's saying to you is, you look at this and you prove to us that you've made the right decisions, that you've not just thought of the low-hanging fruit and we could close this or we could close that and nobody's bothered, that you've looked and you've performed the analysis and you've come up with the correct decisions. And that's the path we followed. So February, the Budget Council decision to reduce public library services to achieve savings. In March, the People and Overview Scrutiny Committee. July, the Cabinet decision. We made that decision to begin the public consultation. That run between the 18th of July and 10th of October, a 12-week public consultation. The 10th of November was the People's Overview and Scrutiny Committee again. And today, the 11th of December, is the final Cabinet decision. In April 26, the changes will be implemented. So moving on to slide 4. And this explains the needs, consideration of the needs of those who live and work and study and visit in the area, the use, consideration of current, previous and projected use of the existing library provision. Geography, consideration of a variation in geography spread of the libraries, and the cost, consideration of the cost of delivering services and savings required. The proposals enable the library service to meet the majority of the savings allocated whilst maintaining a comprehensive and effective offer across the city. Slide 5. We asked respondents to suggest alternative options for savings and service delivery. Delivery ideas are explored in the report and include increasing use of volunteers, reinstating mobile libraries and extending libraries' extra hours, improving publicity and outreach to increase usage, reduce savings targets for libraries and reallocate to other council services. The recommendations include working with partners in exploring alternative options for future community-based provision. It could include community book collection, support local schools and provision for digital exclusive support. So we move on to slide 6, and this is our needs and use analysis and public consultation responses that identify potential impacts of the proposed changes. The team have completed a comprehensive equalities impact assessment, which has identified the impacts and suggests mitigations. This could be disproportionate impact on the vulnerable groups in the city, including disabled people, older people, children and young people, carers, migrants, refugees and those living in poverty. These groups are more likely to rely on libraries for access and resources, including internet and computer, and safe spaces to meet and spend time with their communities. A range of mitigations have been identified and offset the impact of reductions in the public library service. These are explored in more detail in the Equalities Impact and Assessment and include targeted engagement and support of vulnerable groups about the changes, how to access alternative services, monitoring any impacts and reviewing adopted mitigating actions as required, online and digital services, offering services at alternative locations and home delivery services for those who cannot travel to the alternatives. And finally, we come to the final recommendations, which are, again, the reduction in opening hours at Jubilee, 2 hours Monday evening, 5 till 7, 3 hours Sunday afternoon, 2 till 5, Hove, 2 hours Wednesday evening, 5 till 7, 3 hours Saturday afternoon, 2 till 5 p.m. The closure of Hollingbury Library, the closure of Westdean Library, and Rottingdean Library with a commitment, retention of Rottingdean Library with a commitment to scope alternative community-led options for the future. So those are the recommendations we're putting forward to Cabinet this afternoon, and we welcome any questions or comments. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor Robbins. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Robbins. I just wanted to reiterate what Councillor Robbins said, which is that as councillors, we take this really, really seriously. We're residents in this city, and many of us have lived here for decades or grown up here. We understand what frontline services are and what they mean. We use frontline services. I use libraries, although mainly not to take books out, but actually as spaces to either work or take my kids. And so we do understand the importance of these services, and what we would prefer to do is not make any savings versus the library budget. I think, as Councillor Robbins said, the previous 2 items tried to draw out, not in the context of libraries, but in a much broader context, the pressures that the council is facing and the way we have to look at our budgets. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, and I think Councillor Shanks said it today, a relatively small amount of money, £200,000, in the context of our very overall large budget as a council. Well, that's sort of one way to look at it. A different way to look at it is that if we zoom back to the budget that we set in the previous year to close that budget gap. Initially, last year in budget setting, we had a £36 million budget gap. Through mitigations and working on those pressures, we brought that down to a £16 million budget gap. And we set a budget that had £16 million of savings or efficiencies. Now, another way to think about it is this £200,000 of reducing library services is in the context of a whole other £15.8 million of savings, where we're battling to put forward savings that don't impact frontline services. And I would respectfully say, and I'm trying not to be party political, but let's just say previous administrations, when they've had to close much smaller budget gaps, way smaller budget gaps, have reached for the levers of shutting half the toilets in the city and shutting nurseries and shutting all sorts of other things. So what I'm just trying to say to the public is not make excuses, but honestly give our view of what we've been doing as councillors, which is absolutely battling, and I do it every single day as a councillor and every week, as to how can we find efficiencies and savings to stop the frontline element that we never ever want to cut. Why on earth would any of us stand for election to want to cut frontline services, but we just have to lay it out honestly that the vast majority of savings that we make are about efficiencies and reducing the costs of the council but protecting the services. But within that context of the budget gaps, we have had to look at certain services and say, do we need to reduce that overall budget? Now, by the way, the cost of running libraries has been going up, as is the cost of running all services. So in a sense, it's reducing some of the increases that we've been seeing on pressures on our libraries. Now, when we reduce libraries, as Councillor Robbins says, we cannot, and that's probably right, simply say, well, let's just pick this random selection of things that we think make sense to achieve a saving. That has to be done by the needs and use analysis, which is, from what I have seen, a rigorous process that officers have spent a lot of time doing the research on, and obviously the outcome of that is the set of proposals. In conclusion, I think we do have to stick with the budget that we have set to as great a degree as possible. Clearly, there is a small change reflected here, and we do have to make those reductions in the library service in the context of trying to protect the overall library service in the city, which is still a very good library service, and where we have geographically libraries located across the city. We do have a decent geographical spread of libraries, and we do have two very popular and well-used central libraries that we're having to reduce the times on, but that we are overall protecting their usage. So, in conclusion, Chair, with a heavy heart, I do think we should proceed with this set of proposals. And as Councillor Robbins says, in particular on West Dean, we are making a formal decision here, but it is not the end of the story of that building and facility, and we do need to work with the school and the community to see whether there is some continued provision that can be used in that space to the benefit of at least the school, but preferably the overall community. And that's a commitment that we make today in making this set of decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Any other comments or questions from Cabinet? Councillor Mooten.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Robbins, for your presentation, and Councillor Taylor for your very clear points. I want to pick up on perhaps the tone that Councillor Taylor has emphasised. The libraries are really important frontline services, and this report references the sustainability of our library service. And that's exactly what this report sets out to do, to maintain us and sustain what we can offer for a library service. I do think it is important, and as Councillor Taylor intimated, this decision on the budget was made in February. We made that clear decision based in the context of some very tough decisions, and it does seem reasonable to weigh everything up carefully in that context. Yes, I am pleased that there's a potential review of continued provision to look at how we can take that forward in West Dean and what's been put forward for review in Rottingdean over the course of this 12 months. I did watch with great interest the People Overview and Scrutiny Committee time with Councillor Robbins, the detailed questions and robust answers were given there. And one of the recommendations of that scrutiny committee was to look at this carefully, which I think is exactly what has been done, and brought this to this cabinet today. In their motion, or whatever it was you might want to call it, they did not make it clear on our budget alternative, even though essentially a decision around the budget that was already passed. But they did reference something which they called mothballing. And my understanding of a mothballed building is it ends up costing more. You actually have to retain the asset and the liability, but you got no public use or even any potential to make money from that. And so I don't think that's a reasonable direction of travel. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite in the context of what we're trying to achieve, a sustainable library service, which we can sustain within our existing budget. And so I do not believe that is the right direction of travel. And having weighed that up very carefully, I think this is the right decision. And I therefore do support it with a heavy heart, but I think it's the right direction we have to go.
Thank you, Councillor Mooten. I think I've got Councillor Allen next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Likewise, I think, we can all hear in the tone of the debate that it's a sombre occasion. I spent a lot of my childhood in Woodingdean Library, and I would have hated to have seen it closed. And I can understand many of the points that have been emailed to me by concerned residents and campaign groups of the qualitative impact this will have on the community. But one thing we didn't draw out from the last two items was what happens if we don't set a balanced budget and if we declare what's called a Section 114, which is basically declaring bankruptcy, and that is when government commissioners come in and start running your finances for you. So Croydon Council in South London, they issued a Section 114, I believe in 2023, and the government commissioners closed 40% of their libraries, or at least proposed to. Now this is a proposal to close 15% of our libraries, which is still obviously a tough decision. But if we don't have a handle on the finances, it can be so much worse for a much greater proportion of the city. And so we really need to look at, we're not coming at this we think there's too many books in the city or too many librarians or too many people using our libraries. It's that we need to, sadly, live within our means. And so that's why I will be supporting this, because I think that the strategic direction of reorientating the council's resources on having fewer physical library locations and indeed fewer hours in the Hove and Jubilee, but maintaining a good geographic spread that is sensible from Portslade to Saltdean, whilst also having a good library provision within those libraries, especially Libraries Extra, is the right approach. I'd also, as Councillor Taylor says, don't want to make it party political. It's not about that. But the previous Green administration closed libraries. They closed Mile Oak Library. And so they were in exactly the same position as we are now, having to make very similar choices. It's not something we've elected to do. That being said, I think this is the right direction, but a difficult one. And as Councillor Jacob, he couldn't put it better. This isn't the end of the story. For Westdean, there's a government funding for library in the school, and how we unlock that to really make sure that a lot of the pupils in Westdean Primary School still have access to a good library, and the door is still open for future discussions in Rottingdean, which I'm incredibly pleased to see. But I really thank Councillor Robbins for absorbing so much public feedback and trying to work that into the proposals we see before us, and the officers that have supported him in doing that. It's been really impressive. And thank you to all the members of the community who have written to all of us around this table, who have worked with officers, worked with Councillor Robbins to think of ways to enhance the sustainability of our library service.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. Councillor Robbins.
I just want to briefly pick up on what Councillor Newton said. In mothballing these, we're not closing at all Hove or Jubilee, so there's no question of those needing mothballing. Rottingdean will be retained for the next year, so there's no question of that being mothballed. The Old Boat Community Centre, which is where Hollandbury Library is, will continue as a community centre. In fact, it may improve the offer of the community centre at the Old Boat. They're going to take on a book swap. They're going to take on some other of the library service. So it is only Westdean that we would be looking to find how we utilise that bestly. But there is no question of needing to mothball the other four libraries.
Thanks, Councillor Robbins, for that clarity. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Like all my colleagues, this is a difficult decision. I was a child who did not have access to a lot of books at home, and I know how important libraries are. But I also know, to echo Councillor Allen, that we are having to make some extremely difficult decisions. Even after closing the closing these two small libraries and potentially looking at Rottingdean as a community library, we will still have better library provision, for instance, than East Sussex, which geographically you would argue would need to have more libraries per capita because of the geographical spread. So although it's not a great decision, like all of us, we didn't come into administration to get rid of books in the city. It's something I love and I value, and I want children to have access to this, and I want everyone to have access to libraries, but we are where we are, and we do have to balance the books. These are savings we identified, and we have looked, it's been very carefully thought through, as Councillor Robbins has reiterated. There's been a lot of thinking, a lot of working out of what's going on, and I feel I have no choice but to agree with his recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Any more comments or questions from members? No, in which case I will just add my comments, which is that, as I said at the outset, closing any community space is the last thing that anyone wants to do. And as an administration, I'm proud that we have overwhelmingly moved in the opposite direction so far in our 2.5-year term, which is to open new facilities and make universal services even more accessible, from public toilets to outdoor gyms to new swimming pools, to extending face-to-face customer service provision and locating it in 2 of our libraries in Hove and in the Jubilee. However, as others have said, it's also incumbent on us to ensure that council facilities are sustainable and that each service is sustainable. And if individual services are not sustainable, our financial future as a council will be in peril. And I think we heard quite graphically earlier on when we were talking about our budget and our TBM7 position, just how much financial difficulty we, like many local authorities, are still in. No residents or communities are served by this council entering what's known as Section 114 territory, or otherwise known as going bankrupt, and our role in making these decisions when we are faced with them is to be evidence-led, to be fair, and to be objective in our decision-making. On this issue, I'm pleased that we are responding to the particular concerns that have been raised by our residents regarding the closure of Rottingdean, which was originally proposed, given the particularly high number of elderly and disabled users, and that a reprieve has been recommended while we explore community provision and working with the community there to think of a future funding model. The recommendations to close Hollingbury and Westdean libraries are very difficult. These locations have been selected because they have the lowest footfall, so to try and minimise impact. And we've, of course, as Councillor Robbins says, looked at not just usage, but also need, deprivation, geography, as well as cost. And we have also sought to balance the geographic impact by looking at reducing hours in our most central libraries as well, to try and be as fair and as reasonable as possible. In terms of mitigations, citywide, our library provision would still be above average, and as Councillor Miller says, better than, for example, neighbouring East Sussex. With other libraries also relatively close by to the ones that are proposed for closure here. So in Hollingbury's case, there would actually be there's already a second library within the same ward. And as others have said, this library is also already within the thriving community centre, the much-loved Old Boat, which already provides the warmth, the connection and the community that many of the important things that libraries are for. So we will continue to work closely with the community centre to address particular issues that have been raised around digital exclusion. I'm glad to hear Councillor Robbins already talk about the book swap and other ideas that have been thought of to ensure that there is still access and books in that facility. And of course, we've got the e-library and the home delivery service. I note the community concerns that were raised during the public questions earlier about the capacity of those services, the home delivery service, and that's something we've noted and will take away and look at, because obviously any mitigations need to be meaningful and need to be made to work. So the recommendation on Westdean is to close Westdean Library on the 31st of March, and I think it's good to see that this recommendation notes that officers will work with partners in exploring alternative provision for future community-based provision. This would mean that Westdean Library is no longer part of the council's statutory provision. I think one of the things that is most important in my view, if this decision goes ahead, is to try and ensure future provision for school children, which I think many people are agreed is absolutely essential and where this council should be placing its priority. So we will ensure that council officers will continue to work with Westdean Primary School to ensure that books in the library stay available for them. Another important point, which has been mentioned a bit this afternoon, but I just want to be really explicit about it, is that only in the last few weeks have we announced a new fund called the Better Brighton and Hove Fund. This is a pot of money that is made up from contributions that developers make when they undertake house building in the city to try and ensure that as new houses are built, which is something that we want to see and we like to see, there is also funding available for services and infrastructure to support new residents, new families moving into the area. We have decided that a portion of that funding should be made as directly available as possible to residents in their communities. And we've recently set up a system that's currently out for consultation whereby residents in each ward in the city are asked to make suggestions as to how they want to use the pot of funding that is available for their ward. We've ensured that each ward has a minimum of £22,000 over the next year. And interestingly, the pot for Hove Park and Westdean, I note, is one of the highest in the city at £90,000. So I would really encourage residents, if this decision goes ahead today, that are keen to keep community provision open, to consider making this recommendation in response to the consultation that we're currently running and which runs to this Sunday. It's important again to be clear that if this option is pursued by residents, then it would not form part of the council's statutory service. But that said, I personally would be very keen to see a discussion on that with residents and for this council to facilitate that if that's what residents would like to see that money used for. So I'll leave my contributions there and I will then ask Cabinet if they are happy to accept the recommendations as detailed in the report. Agreed. Thank you, colleagues. I'm going to quickly deal with the next paper, which is devolution, because there isn't a paper, and then I'm going to give everybody a comfort break because we still have 4 papers after that. It's a really bumper meeting today. So I'm just going to say very briefly on devolution. The government has announced last week their intention to postpone the mayoral elections in 4 of the areas in the devolution priority programme, of which we in Brighton and Hove are obviously part, along with our colleagues in East and West Sussex, until 2028. We're working closely with our partners in East and West Sussex to engage government ministers and officials to work through the detail of what this means. And we had a very productive meeting earlier today with Minister Fan Buller in MHCLG, who is the minister responsible for devolution. I am very reassured that the government has confirmed our investment fund for devolution, which will be £38 million each year once it's fully up and running. This is money that we wouldn't otherwise be able to access as a city and as a region if it weren't for the fact we weren't in the government's devolution priority programme. And I'm also reassured that we will start receiving at least a portion of this from May 2026, so in just over 6 months' time. I'm also pleased that ministers have been very keen to stress that they want us to receive some of the mayoral powers even before the election of a mayor, so we will waste no time in getting projects off the ground. So there is clearly a very deep commitment still to devolution and constituent councils working closely together to make transformative changes in their places. But while we discuss a new statutory instrument with the government to give effect to this, and while we slightly recalibrate where we're going as a region, we are not proceeding with the devolution paper today. We will update members in the new year, members across the council, when we've got more information and more detail to share on the body that we will be establishing in May. And I hope that we will bring a paper on this to Cabinet in January. So on that note, I'm going to suggest a comfort break of 10 to 15 minutes for colleagues. And then when we come back, we will hear the report on our city transport plan. Thanks, everybody. And that means that our next report is the City Transport Plan, taking us from now to 2035. And so I'd like to ask Councillor Moutin to please introduce this important report.
Thank you, Chair, and very excited to present this. Our City Transport Plan 2035 is an ambitious vision for the future of transport and travel to better serve a fairer, cleaner, growing city over the coming decade. We know Brighton and Hove has long needed an ambitious transport strategy to develop as a vibrant, growing city with a strong visitor economy where residents and businesses can flourish. Our City Transport Plan 2035 responds to this as it outlines a joined-up approach to future transport and travel. Our plan is not just about improving how people get around, but about improving the quality of life for residents, businesses, visitors, and the environment in every part of the city. Yes, every part. From Rottingdean to Portslade, Poets Corner to Saltdean, West Hill to Woodingdean, Patcham, Prestonville, and the Palace Pier. It's about providing genuine, fairer, cleaner, and easier choices for people in terms of how we move around our city, regardless of which type of travel we might use, improving air quality and public health, low carbon flowing traffic with excellent public transport, equitable and accessible for all, and well-designed, safe, active travel options, enabling our city to move, prosper and thrive. Our City Transport Plan 2035 reflects our council plan by building on 4 broad principles for a cleaner, fairer, growing city supported by well-run services. It's a vision for moving around a thriving, sustainable, growing city. By 2035, Brighton and Hove aims to be a place where active travel and public transport are the preferred options to get around. Electric vehicles are the norm, supported by robust charging infrastructure. Public transport is safer, more inclusive and accessible for all, and council transport services from highways through to parking are reliable, efficient, accessible and well maintained. This transformation is underpinned by 4 key principles. Number 1, a cleaner, healthier, sustainable transport system significantly contributing to cleaner air, low through to zero tailpipe emissions, net zero and improved public health with a cleaner public transport, better, safer active travel through good design and access for all. Number 2, a fairer, more equitable transport that works well for all, a transport system helping to tackle deep-seated inequality, aligned with and delivers on our accessible city strategy, does not exclude based on income or ability, even as we move towards a low-carbon transport options, and encourages more to consider healthier options in their transport choices. Number 3, a transport system that enables a thriving, growing city, open for business, our important visitor, nighttime, retail, leisure, culture and innovation economies, not just for city residents, but for the region and beyond. And number 4, a transport network supported by well-run council services, responsive, innovative, available and well-placed to serve. With inclusive parking services, responsive teams to promptly assess and fix, from small scale to large projects, set up to serve our city well. Brighton and Hove Transport Future is one of inclusivity, sustainability and innovation. Our City Transport Plan is not just a policy document, it's a framework for residents, businesses and visitors that our city will remain vibrant, accessible, healthy and resilient in the face of change. Our long-term vision seeks to transform the city's transport network, addressing key challenges such as reducing congestion, supporting zero-emission vehicles and providing better public transport for all. The strategy includes a series of projects aimed at improving accessibility, maintaining infrastructure and reducing carbon emissions, setting the stage for a cleaner, fairer and more sustainable transport system over the next decade. But Brighton and Hove is known for its vibrant culture and growing population. This has been in need of an ambitious transport strategy. Our city transport plan is a comprehensive response to these needs, as it outlines an integrated approach for future city travel. The plan is not just about improving how people get around, but it's improving the quality of life for all. So when we consulted, which we have done, we set out five key challenges within the plan. And these were within our plan, enabling healthier, active lifestyles, city committed to creating a safer environment where residents can walk, cycle and use public transport with greater ease, reducing road congestion, improving traffic flow and reducing delays as a priority, and improving air quality in the mix, supporting the transition to zero and ultra-low emission transport, encouraging electric vehicles and low emission alternatives is vital in reducing the city's carbon footprint and improving air quality, and creating an inclusive travel network, ensuring that transport is accessible to all residents, including those with disabilities and the elderly, is a fundamental objective in connecting communities, maintaining and managing roads efficiently. Proper maintenance and management for our infrastructure will ensure roads, pavements and pathways are fit for our future needs. So within our consultation, we set out objectives to shape the future of Brighton and Hove transport. The plan includes 6 major objectives as a guide to the city transport system. That is to increase public transport usage, at higher adoption of rates of buses, trams, trains, and plan to make public transport more attractive option. Support zero and ultra-low emission transport. How we do that? In expanding electric vehicle infrastructure and encouraging sustainable modes of transport, delivering a safe, inclusive and integrated transport system. Accessibility will be improved, ensuring that the entire transport network is safer and easier for everyone to use. Well-maintained streets, pavements and rights of way. The plan aims to ensure these streets and pavements are well maintained, improving safety and ease of movement for all. Encouraging active travel, a focus of walking and cycling with the creation of excellent public spaces and better routes for facilities will provide healthier travel options. Design matters. And use of technology, levering digital solutions to improve the management and flow of transport, as well as providing real-time travel information for all users. And then we listen to local feedback as part of the consultation process. And this has been vital. So a lot of community engagement, and the draft plan was open for public consultation, received over 500 responses from the local community, including workshops, exhibitions and meetings with key stakeholders, including disabled groups, to ensure diverse voices were heard. We also went to secondary schools and to our transport partnership as well. We got a lot of feedback within the consultation. Feedback from residents and businesses revealed a strong desire for better maintained streets, more affordable public transport, improved facilities for walking, cycling and wheelchair use. Many expressed concerns over the current state of traffic congestion, especially during peak hours, and the challenge of navigation through crowded streets. So, I'll get to the point. So adopting this plan fulfills a statutory requirement. The plan sets out a 10-year strategic vision, getting around a cleaner, fairer, growing city, sets out a pipeline of transport schemes to deliver this vision, estimates the carbon emissions reductions our policies should deliver, and in support of our ambitious vision for our City Transport Plan 2035, the future of transport and travel for a fairer, cleaner, growing city, I recommend this report to Cabinet today. Thank you.
Many thanks, Councillor Mooton, to you and to officers for the huge amount of work that I know has gone into this. It's a huge task. Can I take comments and questions? I've got Councillor Oakin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Newton and officers for all the hard work. I know it's a very long document, having read it thoroughly, as I have done. Some really good things to see in there. The published streetscape design guide, I think, is going to be a welcome sort of step in the right direction. And obviously, there's talk of climate change adaptation in there, which of course is crucial. The Sussex Coast Mass Rapid Transit System, not only does that sound very exciting, I think that's something we probably all experienced, slow journeys both to the east and west of Brighton, and so speeding those journeys up at some point in the future with something big and strategic would be a bit of a game changer, I think. A few specific bits. So section 5.6 talks about, and this is looking at the consultation responses, and the most supported measure in that consultation was cheaper public transport. I'm not surprised about that, and I think, yeah, we'll come on to EVs, I think, in a little while. You know, there's in the long term, a big part of the picture of decarbonising transport is going to be switching to EVs, but in the period of time that it takes to get there, we do obviously also need to reduce demand, reduce journeys, and reduce car usage, and that is going to mean more public transport is a very difficult one. Obviously, we have, we don't have direct control of the buses here, and certainly my strong view is that public transport belongs in public hands. It's been very good to see the early set of rolling stock from Great British Railways. Those people have seen those online. Very exciting to see publicly owned trains coming back into the mix. But I'd like to see the same happen with our buses at some point in the city and indeed in Sussex. Wanted to pick up on page 455, so it's going quite far into the report. This is talking about the amount of emissions generated by relatively short car journeys, private car journeys of 5 miles or less. The report mentions 36% of emissions are derived from those kinds of trips, and obviously if you could get a good number of those into public transport, that would be great. I'm conscious that Councillor Earthy earlier raised a question about that particular number, and also about the transport-derived carbon emissions moreover in the report. I wondered if you wanted to have an opportunity to sort of come back on that, Trevor, and then if I may, I'll come back with a couple of other questions as well.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Oakins. You made some really good points there, and actually is spot on in relation to streetscapes design, mass transport system. I think as a city we wish to grow. I think we've got to really seriously think how to enable more people to move, and I think mass transport and cheaper public transport innovation is absolutely right. That point about the short car journey is very impactful, and if we can think about how we can reduce those down and make those cleaner is vital to enable unlock so much for our city, and that's for active travel, walking, cycling, but also excellent bus connections between communities is vital, and we can look at how our bus system works to start connecting different communities. What we've done in Woodingdean to Falmouth this year, there was a gap in the network. We can start bridging that, and that's already demonstrated that people are choosing a bus rather than driving relatively short distance between those two communities. So there is more. That's a great example of what we can do. Hear that point very clearly. We actually do have one of the, by far, the best used bus service outside London for any local authority. So we've got to credit the fact we do have a really good bus service, but I hear that point about governance and control. And I think that's a very important point. If we want to take this forward, I think we can do more and perhaps look at how it fits within the Sussex region as well. And I do want to pick up on the point that you rightly have picked up on, and that was the challenge presented by the Brighton and Hove Independent Group today. And I think that does need a response, which I'm happy to do. So in response to their challenge, the publicly available carbon assessment playbook, decarbonisation baseline report for Brighton and Hove, which I'll send a link, which summarises the outputs from the carbon assessment playbook, also makes it clear the methodology used was designed to align with the Department for Transport guidance, and it has been calibrated to DS and the DESNES statistics. Sorry, the introduction of the report states, and I quote, "This report provides an overview of current and future use emissions through to 2050, providing the baseline upon which future interventions may be defined to support Brighton and Hove with reaching net zero across the transport network. The approach adopted aligns with the current proposed in the Department for Transport's draft Quantifiable Carbon Reduction, or QCR, guidance, which remains awaiting ministerial approval as of October 2023. It is contended that the CAP emissions are not territorial. Section 2.2 of the Carbon Assessment Playbook Decarbonisation Baseline Report for Brighton and Hove says that total user emission for Brighton and Hove in 2019 are 0.329 million tonnes of carbon dioxide per annum. These reflect all emissions bounded by local transport authority areas and comprise, and it continues from there. These issues were raised during the consultation. Officers met with respondents who raised these concerns. From this meeting, it was apparent that some sections of the Carbon Assessment Playbook Decarbonisation Baseline Report for Brighton and Hove provides additional information about journey originating from Brighton and includes journeys beyond the council boundary, critical point there. However, the baseline information used are wholly territorial emissions. The Brighton and Hove Independent Group's representation went on to set out their interpretation of the DFT guidance. The official baseline must come from the DESNES Local Authority greenhouse gas statistics. From Brighton and Hove, the DESNES transport emission for 2019 are 288 kilotons CO2 net. This was the only figure that can serve as the official carbon baseline under QCG. We disagree with this interpretation. We do not believe that a phrase "aligned with" precludes using emission figures in the Carbon Assessment Playbook. The whole purpose of the CAP is for it to be used by local transport authorities to quantify their carbon emissions, and it has demonstrably been aligned with DESNES statistics. So therefore, I conclude in this point, we are confident that our City Transport Plan 2035 is robust, stands up, aligns with DFT guidance and demonstrably calibrated to and aligns with DESNES statistics. We have properly applied the Carbon Assessment Playbook to quantify our carbon emissions, and we can and do robustly refute Brighton and Hove Independent Group's misplaced assertions and assumptions. Our City Transport Plan 2035 stands up and demonstrably built to being acceptable to the DFT. So, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mootin. That was very thorough. Councillor Okins.
Thank you. Yeah, I deliberately split this into two parts because I had a feeling that would be a detailed response, which it was, and I'm grateful for. So that's very reassuring and good to see that that's properly been looked at. I guess that's one of the challenges of having tools available to us that are not necessarily publicly available at the time when you do the work. But that's good to have that clarity and reassurance. Just picking up on some of the other bits of the report, obviously there's talk about active travel, and I think my experience in the last couple of years is certainly that the quality of our active travel schemes is much better in terms of design and use and shared multimodal forms of transport and all the rest of it. I do just want to just highlight the need for pavements within that, because I think we have got we've got some very problematic pavements, and there's several in my ward, and I think there's always more we can do on all this stuff, obviously, because the money available is the money that's available. But looking at how we dovetail with some of the other things we're doing on accessibility and tree planting and trying to get some good bang for buck out of that. Just coming back to the EV point, because obviously, when you zoom ahead, 20 odd years, having a very, very much higher proportion of vehicles being fully electric is going to be the future. I'm obviously pleased to see that the Labour government moved the zero emissions vehicle mandate back to 2030 from 2035. In my view, it was ridiculous that the previous government moved that to 2035, given that the entire automotive industry had already pivoted towards 2030 and plans and production lines and everything were well on the way. I thought that was absolutely crazy. So I'm pleased to see that being back where it belongs. And obviously there's a lot of work going on here. You mentioned that we've got the highest bus usage outside of London. We've also got the best EV charging network outside of London, and we're doing literally thousands more over the next few years. So I think that's great. I do just want to highlight one thing which I know we've talked about with officers already, which is in the area of the city that I live, for example, there's a few people with EVs on the street. We don't have off-street parking there, and I think we do need to quite quickly come up with a solution for those residents, because there are people indeed who already have EVs, but certainly others who want to get one, for whom that charging, the rigmarole of having to potentially run cables across the street. I'm conscious that there is I think I'm right in saying a central government grant for to support the cost of cross-pavement channels, and I think that grant, at least the first tranche of it, finishes in April next year, and as things stand at the moment, we're not yet in a position to be able to enable residents to take that grant and do the work. So that's more a sort of just a sort of shout out to officers, really, that the clock is ticking on that, and it would be great to get something in so that residents can take advantage of that grant. I think I'll stop there, respond if you like, but we can pick it up later.
Thank you, Councillor Rokins. I will respond. There's been a lot of points. I won't respond to all the points, but I do want to emphasise that cross-pavement charging. We're absolutely, although we're at a very early stage, we're aware of certain trials that have been done by local authorities. I believe in July the government set out some guidance stemming from that, which our officers have taken and interpreted. And we're in the process of thinking what that looks like in terms of fees and charges, and also design standards, etc. So we are working on that. And want to emphasise a couple of other points. You referenced a grant that individuals can get, and that there is a clock ticking up. It may be extended, but we do need to work up to make that accessible. But the council has also submitted a bid for up to £187,000 funding for residents towards the cost of installing cross-pavement channels, and understand we hear back from the government on that grant offer from January, and that does extend beyond April as well. So that's a slightly different grant. There's a couple of options. There's the individual one, but also the council. Once you've got that in place, that again opens that up. I recognise there is an urgency to set out our standards for cross-pavement. No size, one size doesn't fit all. Some people may be well positioned to have a nice space out front their front door and plug in right there. Others may not. Might be in a corner. Might be a double yellow line. Or something quite unsuitable. So it's quite a difficult thing to navigate, and the guidance and the trials so far have highlighted some challenges as well, public liability, etc. So we're looking very, very carefully at how that can be, and how site suitability, licensing requirements, liability, as well as eligibility for council grants if our bid is successful. And so officers are working presently to develop policies on cross-pavement charging. The policies can then be included in the wider Cabinet report EV charging, which we anticipate coming next year. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Moutin. I've got Councillor Allen and then Robin.
Thank you, Chair. I was very heartened to see that following the public consultation, the area that gained the most public support was the objective of creating well-maintained streets and pavements. And as Cabinet Member for Public Realm, that gives me great fuel to continue in our administration's aim of improving the look and feel of the city. And so what I really like about this strategy is that it includes a commitment to refresh the city streetscape design code, so that not only when we create new areas of public realm, that it will all have very coherent street furniture and design. But when statutory undertakers come along and have a right to rip up a road, to lay a new cable or sort out a water pipe, no more shoddy work. We will hold them robustly to the design code of how we want our streets to look. So that means it's not just us cleaning up after other people's mess, but they'll get it right first time, which residents will really appreciate. I was also really heartened to see the consultation response from Historic England, where they said, and I quote verbatim, "We would support integration of transport solutions into streetscape and public realm, particularly in historically sensitive locations such as conservation areas." Now, we have loads of conservation areas, mainly in our city centre, because we have some really lovely heritage assets that it's a privilege to live amongst. So making sure that our city centre is well designed and well kept, integrating heritage alongside transport, alongside housing, is how we get a city to be proud of. And so I think with that thrust, this is a really good policy and I'm proud to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I couldn't agree more. Any other comments? Sorry, I've got Councillor Robbins, then I'll come back to Councillor Newton.
Thanks, Trevor, and thanks, Councillor Newton, and thanks for, as always, a full and frank report. I've a bit of a dream, really, that one day, and it's to do with buses, and it's not to do with the number 6. You'll be glad to know, but it is to do with buses, and it's to do with when you need to multi-buses to get to a certain area of the city. I mean, I now have a bus pass, so I find it a lot easier to travel around that way. But I know my wife is constantly on at me about if I go from my house to, say, the open market, I have to take 3 buses. And every time you get off a bus and onto another bus, you've got to pay again. Recently, I was in Brussels, and the way the public transport, and I take Councillor Rokin's point that these are now government-owned or government-run transport systems I'm talking about. But when you tap on, you get an hour travel. So it doesn't really matter how many times you change the bus, because you're paying for an hour's travel. Now, I could travel for an hour on one bus and it cost me £3 or is it £2? I don't know. But if I take 3 buses, I know that they cap it at a certain level. But I just think it would be nice if we could come up with a similar system where when you tapped on, you could take buses on different routes for an hour and visit different areas of the city.
Councillor Newton, you had your hand up. Yeah. Oh, do you want? Okay, I'll take Councillor Miller and then come back to Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to look at accessibility. As somebody, I'm not actually legally visually impaired, but my sight is sufficiently bad that evenings I am no longer able to cycle and I'm no longer able to drive because my eyesight is sufficiently impaired. And I am completely dependent on the public transport network and on walking. And I think it's really, there's often a common perception that accessibility means having lots of blue badge parking and lots of roads for people to drive. Actually, for somebody like me, driving isn't an option. My time of driving in the winter is very limited. It's basically 8 a.m. to about 4:30 p.m. and that's it. And then it's too dark for me and I cannot drive. So I think it's really, really important that we look at always remind everybody and look at the different types of disabilities that can cause people to need different ways of travel. So I think for me that our bus network is absolutely crucial and I'm so grateful that it's being prioritised, and I just want to raise the point that it is vital for people like me.
Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Chair, and I really want to draw those points together. So, Councillor Allen, Councillor Miller, Councillor Okins, key points here. One of the things you all said was about accessibility of pavements in effect, and getting our pavements fixed is really crucial. I think a lot of money has been, when we get highways maintenance, we think we must fix the roads, potholes. Yes, we've got a backlog, we must do that. However, it's really important that we make sure we get more money and more money for pavement maintenance as well. We've got some pavements in the right state in parts of the city, and crucially, accessibility along the pavement from the front door to a nearby bus stop or train station, whatever it is absolutely vital, because if people find that accessible and safe, well lit, a well maintained pavement with good crossings, so a Better Safer Streets programme, for instance, so it's designed well with drop curves and lights that are responsive to the pedestrian and the cyclist, whatever, who wants to use that space, then if people get from the front door to the bus stop, they're more likely to take public transport. If they feel unsafe or find it inaccessible to do that route, they're more likely to take a lift, a cab. So we want to really encourage public transport. I think unlocking that further is to sort out the pavements and make them accessible. Absolutely vital. And absolutely do celebrate the focus that we're bringing into this to get a streetscape design guide. This is something which is absolutely needed, a standard which we can be confident that when utility companies and their contractors work on a streetworks permit issued by the council, that they are going to deliver a finish which we know and residents know full well it is acceptable. We do not want to see the social media test of a half-finished zebra, a half-finished bus sign on the road, and we will. I will pull up any utility that does that. We have to make sure the standards are right, and we need to refresh our streetscapes design guide, and it's absolutely vital. And I would tend to agree with you, Alan. We need a much more integrated single ticket approach to buses. At the moment, we do have different operators in the city, predominantly one, but where, for instance, somebody gets a Compass bus and then a Brighton Hove bus, it's actually up to the council to coordinate those two tickets because they're not meant to talk to each other. There's some legal reason why not. And so we need to work that through. But there's actually an opportunity coming, and that's the Strategic Rail Authority, because they can actually not just do an integrated ticket for the city, but an integrated ticket for people travelling beyond, into and out of our city as well. And that's really exciting because we can actually look at a one-ticket approach that could actually help with buses, railways, bike hire, and maybe e-bike hire and who knows, e-scooter if it happens. And also the potential for a mass transport, Sussex Coast mass transport system, because if we are to grow into the city that we aspire to, we need to think of how can we move effectively on numbers. And I think we do need to look at what that mass transport system looks like, and an integrated single ticket with good governance from public authority is really positive.
Thank you, everybody, for this really full and informed debate. And it continues with Councillor Alexander.
I felt it my duty as Queen of the Buses just to let the room know, and anyone watching, that Brighton Hove buses actually do a 1 hour ticket. It's called a City Saver 60-minute ticket. You have to buy it on the mobile app, or if you're using your debit card to tap on and off, then that kicks in then as well. Just thought I'd let you know.
Thank you, Queen of the Buses over here. Councillor Robbins, you have been told. Without further ado, do Cabinet colleagues agree the recommendations detailed in the report? Agreed. Thank you very much, everybody. That was an excellent discussion and really exciting stuff. I'm going to move us now to our next report, which is Regulator of Social Housing, Response to Regulatory Judgment, including Procurement of Stock Conditions, Contractor. And we have Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be as brief as possible. Okay, so this report provides Cabinet with our 6-month update on the Council's response to the Regulator of Social Housing Regulatory Judgment of August 2024 relating to the Housing Safety and Quality Consumer Standard, and it recommends that the Cabinet note the report. Now, the report forms part of the Council's formal intensive engagement with the RSH and demonstrates, and I'm really happy to say this, the direction of travel remains very positive, and we do have an awful lot of people to thank for this, and we know how much work Martin particularly and all the people that work on it, because I know how much work that goes into it. So please thank everybody concerned from us. I'm very pleased to say that it's positive because we've got some great highlights to tell you about. So electrical safety up 53% to 93% of homes with a valid electrical certificate within 5 years. Smoke detection now over 99%. Repairs backlog has reduced from 9,653 to 2,479, which is hugely significant. We've already heard how the FRA actions are down from 8,268 to 2,918, and high-risk actions have been sharply reduced. So I'm so pleased to report that we have made significant progress. There are a few fragile areas, of course. Water safety continues to receive sustained attention, and the next stage is to embed a new governance model to mobilise the remediation programme and, importantly, improve contractor performance. And compliance data needs to be fully integrated across all systems, and there is a lot of work going on there. AWAB's law, which is very welcome, increases operational pressure on repairs and maintenance, especially around damp and mould, and we've taken special actions to tackle that so that our residents don't have to suffer with damp and mould. And we also we are seeking delegated authority for the Corporate Director of Homes and Adult Social Care, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Housing, to procure and award a 2-year stock condition survey contract with an estimated value of £2 million. Now, why do we need that stock condition survey? Well, we are behind a rolling target of having all our stock surveyed within 5 years. The regulator expects landlords to understand fully the condition of every home in our city, and quite right too. So we need that stock condition programme that gives us that capacity and consistency. And this supports AWAB's law, decent homes, HRA business planning, major works programming and climate commitment. And I will hand over to Councillor Robinson, who may want to say a few more words about the procurement part of it.
Thank you, Councillor Williams and Chair. So the introduction of this report talks about the council now shifting from short-term recovery to a more mature systems-led approach, where compliance activity is routine and data-driven. So the procurement of this 2-year stock condition contract is part of that data-driven approach. So today the Cabinet's been requested to give authority to proceed with this procurement as it's valued at over £2 million and wasn't included in the forward plan. But we know officers have already started research on the route to market, detail of the data to be collected and how that data will be uploaded or stored in our systems for use today and in the future. So the outcome will be detailed data on the condition of all homes, which will allow us to map out a programme of repairs and upgrades where necessary, based on the need identified in the surveys. So it's a system-led approach. Thank you.
Thank you both for the update. And as you say, it sounds like really positive direction of travel, sorting out some really serious legacy and historic issues, and a systems approach is exactly what we need to avoid a repeat. And I know there was a very thorough systems analysis of how we got to where we did, and obviously a systems approach will help ensure that we never get back there again. Comments and questions from colleagues on this report. Councillor Oakins.
Thanks, Joe. Just a very quick one. I mean, I think we've obviously received pretty regular updates on the progress of this, and I think there has been some remarkable progress. And I think Councillor Williams, some of the numbers you've just set out really sort of illustrate the sort of hard work and laser focus. But I don't know what my main point here is, but I suppose it's it's easy to look at these numbers, these big numbers reducing to smaller numbers, and the percentages going up, and that's great. That's something to feel good about. But having visited so many council housing premises and everything in my time as a councillor and beforehand, every single one of these is someone's home, right? And if you've got a system where you've got, not far off 10,000 repairs outstanding, I mean, what does that do to, these are people's homes, they've got kids there, and often in quite cramped conditions. Like having a light that doesn't work in the hallway or whatever can actually really start to, have a major impact. So, and let alone when you start talking about damp and mold. So I think it's really good, but I just sort of want to shine a light on the sort of, lived realities of our council tenants, and how important it is that we keep in mind that these are our family homes that people live in, and that it's really, really important that we keep up this work. And as we say, we're getting out of kind of sort of borderline crisis management mode and into a sort of more sustaining system that can continue that improvement. So just to sort of make that point really that we keep focused on that as well.
Thanks, Councillor Okins. Very important point. Any other comments from colleagues on this? No, excellent. Thanks very much for the report, Councillor Williams. Thanks very much to officers for this update and the regular updates that you bring us. I'm just going to find... So just to be clear, that we are noting the progress made in improving compliance with the regulator of social housing, and we are also, in this decision, delegating authority to the corporate director in consultation with cabinet member to procure and award a 2-year stock condition survey contract via procurement of a specialist contractor with an estimated value of £2 million to take the necessary steps to mobilise and manage the contract. Is cabinet happy to agree these recommendations? Agreed. Thanks very much, colleagues. So now we come to a very important item as well, which is our homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, which has been out to consultation, and I'm really happy to hand over to Councillor Nan to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report today is to seek Cabinet's formal approval for our homelessness strategy 2025 to 2030. As a local authority, producing this strategy is a requirement, and I'm confident that officers have produced a document that clearly reflects our priorities and our values, and robustly addresses the current urgent concerns within our city. There are 2 asks to Cabinet. The first is that they approve the strategy as it is, and the second is that authority is delegated to the corporate director in consultation. Has that gone off? No. The Cabinet Member for Housing and the Cabinet Advisor on Homelessness to approve the final delivery plan of this strategy. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the context, but I'll repeat it because it bears repeating. Before I outline the key pillars, I think we have to acknowledge the severity of the national crisis and the disproportionate impact that we in this city are experiencing. We have 3,580 homeless people in the city, and that means 1 in 77 of our residents is currently experiencing homelessness. And that doesn't even account for the hidden homeless population that we obviously have. And I was really pleased to see in the national strategy mentioned today that hidden homelessness and that sort of thing are acknowledged. Even more tragically, 40% of these are children and young people who are experiencing homelessness. And we have a new type of intergenerational homelessness emerging where homeless children inherit homelessness as their birthright. And we also have an escalating financial burden of managing this crisis, and it's consuming ever-increasing amounts of public money, while our dedicated officers are simultaneously asked to deliver more with fewer resources. There is positive momentum. Even in this difficult climate, our teams have achieved significant positive outcomes. Based on my experience of the excellent work being done, I'm confident that the recent street count will confirm a falling number of rough sleepers. We've committed to an ambitious Councillor Taylor has committed us to an ambitious programme of buying homes to improve the quality and reduce the cost of temporary accommodation. We've successfully embedded an intersectional approach, creating targeted supported facilities for our LGBTQ+ residents and women experiencing homelessness, including this year women-only sweat provision. And we've updated and improved our allocations policy to ensure that those who've experienced homeless can stay on the housing register after they move into PRS. This new strategy rests on 4 pillars. First of all, we will prioritise children and families. We will shift our focus to addressing the devastating impact of homelessness on families, young people and crucially children. I'm really proud that our evidence-based approach has allowed us to recognise this as a crucial emerging issue, preempting the national government's recent announcement to make this a part of their key strategy. We'll improve temporary accommodation. The strategy will call on officers to work to improve pathways out of temporary accommodation, to substantially increase support for people residing there, and to enhance the overall quality of the provision. This is vital given the profound financial and social impact of temporary accommodation in our city. The strategy will increase targeting on I'm sorry, I'm slightly different. I can never quite hear if this is working properly. Bring it closer, sorry. Yeah, cool. So we will call on officers to work with those with the most complex and multiple obligation is literally a life-saving, and frankly support to these people reduces the cost of their homelessness in the longer term. The strategy will call on officers to embrace prevention and prediction.
It's just gone off again. I think see if Councillor Robinson is better.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks, Joe. So homelessness is rarely a spontaneous occurrence. The strategy calls on officers to embrace early intervention and utilise methods to predict who is in danger of becoming homeless and take decisive action to stop it before it happens. In closing, I sincerely want to thank the officers for their exceptional work on this strategy. Their commitment ensured that individual voices of those currently experiencing homelessness and the impactful input of our vital third sector partners were clearly heard. And I thank those people and organisations for their invaluable support. This strategy recognises that we will not be able to do this on our own. If approved, I look forward to this strategy being fully operationalised and seeing the real-world benefits of this renewed focus on early intervention, the needs of children and proactive partnership working.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. I'm going to bring in Councillor Williams.
There we are. Thank you for all the work involved in this, Councillor Nan. I know how dedicated you are to this issue, and thank you to the officers for bringing this report. And I do want to reiterate what we talked about at the beginning of this meeting about the housing crisis that we find ourselves in. And this is one of the darkest moments of our recent history, that we are looking at these figures. We are looking at children that don't know anything else except homelessness and temporary, and so many children moving schools simply because they don't know where they're going to live next. And it's just shocking. It's why we all do what we do, and why Councillor Nan and myself bore everybody else to death about our passion for housing. But this is the basis of everything. If you don't have a roof over your head, you don't have anything, is what I always say. So I thank everybody for the work we're doing. And it's not just about having this strategy, it's putting it in action. This is the important thing, and I'm proud to say that this administration actually stands by its word. I know the housing strategy is, we are putting that into action, and I know this is going to be put into action as well, and I await further from Councillor Nan on this. But thank everybody for it, and let's hope that, all the help that we can get to resolve this issue, and I hope one day, and I hope it's not too far away, we will see an end to this. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Williams. I will just add for my own part, I think this is an absolutely excellent strategy. I think it is really thoughtful. I think the way it's been iterated is fantastic, and exactly how this council should co-produce work with people that experience the issues that we're trying to address, as well as partners in the city. And we know we do have a lot of partners in this area. So I massively want to thank Councillor Nan, Councillor Williams and officers for bringing forward something that is so thoughtful. I think the fact that we're discussing this on the day that the government has produced its homelessness strategy is excellent. And I think as Councillor Nan has sort of trailed, although I have to admit I've only skimmed government's strategy so far, there is clearly so much read over, the focus on prevention, giving particular attention to families and young people. I think we are working in lockstep with the government on this. We've identified the causes, particularly here in the city. Many of those are replicated nationwide. And I truly believe, both in terms of this strategy and so many of the other interventions we are trying to make on housing, that we are being as sort of creative and thoughtful as we can in, what is, as others have said, a national crisis that has been being sort of stored up for decades, and we're now in the sort of perfect storm of it right here in Brighton. So really, really commend this work. I think it's outstanding. Councillor Daniel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Councillor Nan and Williams, for this. I grew up in awful private accommodation in Birmingham, and I was just thinking about the last house I lived in and the spiders, and I just think of it as the spider house. The spiders were the size of my hand. I swear to God, that was awful. But when the Labour government came in, the scale of the social house building that they built, maybe not council housing, but social housing. By the time I started work, I moved into a brand new flat with social rent. When I got another job in another part of the UK, I moved into another brand new flat that I could afford at an entry-level job wage. And it was transformative. And as has been explained, we've had a barely regulated private sector, absolute bare minimum, and that has been that's been the cause of the failure, that lack of regulation. And the Renters' Rights Act will be transformative, along with the 39 billion that Rachel Reeves is investing in social housing, which is double what was planned by the previous government. And hopefully that will keep growing if our headroom grows and things that I don't fully understand. But I think that the ambition is clear, that housing and Build Baby Build is the absolute priority, and rightly so. The last Labour government sought to end the use of B&Bs, and I really feel like the test of this one will be getting children out of temporary accommodation. 172,000 children across the UK live in temporary accommodation, 1,400 estimated by Shelter in our own city. Our own figures show that last year, 47% of households in temporary accommodation contain children. And where we have to move them to not the best kind of standard of temporary accommodation, maybe not local temporary accommodation, not as local as we'd like temporary accommodation, we know that that has a detrimental impact on their connections to school, friends, sports teams, orchestra, whatever they're involved with. We know that. And so I think the fact that we have brought them front and centre into this strategy, put them as a priority, the fact that we are investing in accommodation in our city that they can be prioritised for, I think shows that because we understand that if we want to make an impact on the educational incomes for disadvantaged children, we have to prioritise keeping them connected to school, and their friends and their activities. And I think that this shows, and I hope that residents can see with this policy, with the Sutton Trust Award-winning schools policy, that we are using every lever we possibly can as a council in lockstep with the government to ensure the social mobility of disadvantaged children, which is why I'm Labour. It's why I, stuck with Labour in the dark days, knocking doors when no one wanted to hear from us, because someone did that for me and my life changed. And this policy will make a tangible difference to thousands of children over the next 10 years. And thank you so much for the work you've put into it.
Soapbox moment. Thank you, Councillor Daniel. Councillor Nan.
It was officers working in main, so I hope that is what you meant. I just wanted to go back to what Jill said about confidence in the ability of officers to operationalise this, because a strategy without clear and proper I've lost the word. That word is just hot air. It's just, it means nothing. And I have two reasons to be confident that it will be able to do that. Firstly, they nailed this strategy pretty much. They nailed this strategy, and it's obvious because it is clearly aligned with the national government strategy, and they did that with limited resources and doing half a dozen other things as well. And it chimes with what national government have decided is important as well, and that's a strong clue that they know what they're doing and they know how to do it. But secondly, I think the introduction of duty to cooperate today that was announced in the national strategy makes things a lot easier for them to get out there and corral and organise our many and wonderful partners into producing good operational methods and practices to start making a dent in the problem that we've got. So, along with Councillor Williams, I'm filled with confidence that our officers can do this.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. Councillor Rokins.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I'm going to have a pop at the Daily Mail, actually, because usually it's the other way round. One of the key actions in this relates to improving both the supply and the quality of temporary accommodation. And both of those are crucially important. Quality for all of the reasons that Councillor Daniels just laid out. Supply, because clearly we have a need for it and clearly it's costing us a fortune. But I want to remind commentators out there of some of these stats, and just to remind those commentators that, as Councillor Nan said earlier, 40% of the homeless population here are children. 47% of households in temporary accommodation have children in those households. So when those commentators, the Daily Mail ran an unbelievably grotesque article a few weeks ago in response to our proposed acquisition of some properties in Rottingdean, suggesting that Rottingdean is no place for social housing because Rudyard Kipling used to live there and there happens to be a windmill. That kind of snobbery is absolutely absurd. Social housing is something to be proud of and it belongs everywhere. And I just want those commentators to really hold that in mind, that we are talking about families and children, and they've got no business making comments like that about anywhere, let alone our city.
Here. Councillor Robbins.
I did make this point, and it's not a point I ever want to labour, but it's more what we now call sofa surfing, and I know that we've talked about it, Paul. And from the age of 14 to I moved in with my wife now when I was about 27, so about 13 years. I've just tried to tot up the different addresses I had, and I got to about 17, and that's ones I can't even, there's more than that I can't even remember. And, moving every few months in that 13-year period where people had let me sleep on the settee, or let me sleep in the spare room, or let me, sleep on the floor or wherever. And thinking back upon it, how you never got to relax in all that time. I don't think I ever relaxed. I never felt like I had somewhere to call home, really. You'd be there. And I spoke to somebody who was actually homeless about it a few years ago, and he said he'd done exactly the same thing, but he ran out of friends. It wasn't that he fell out with everybody, it's that the people who were allowing him to sleep in their spare rooms or on their floor, and they started to have children, or they settled down in other ways, or they split up or whatever, and he had nowhere left to go. And I think it's got to be remembered. And if you're talking of families that are living out of boxes or living out of suitcases, or don't unpack because they don't know if they're going to be there for more than a month or two, it must be dreadful, and how young kids, although I suppose at some time I was a young kid as well. You know, it's not a pleasant thought, and it plays on your mind.
Thank you, Councillor Robbins. Councillor Mooton.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to firstly do want to credit and thank the officers who've pulled together this report after a lot of hard work. And I do know this has been an incredible journey with this. So I do credit all the officers involved with this report and assessment of it. There's some shocking stats in here, and I know Councillor Nan drew those out in his summary. But particularly in relation to 1 in 77 people in the city, according to Shelter in 2024, are homeless. And that's 3,500. And as Councillor Nan pointed out, 40% of that number are children. And there is a growing number of intergenerational, i.e., people born into homelessness effectively and growing up in homelessness. Where it becomes a norm. And that should not be the case. It's so shocking. I'm deeply shocked. But in this, I also wish to credit Councillor Nan for your leadership. And I know I know you well enough to know you will humbly not accept that. But I know you are leading on this. And I want the reason for crediting you here is that I know in this city there are a numerous array of commissioned and non-commissioned civic and public organisations, faith-based groups, churches, mosques and others, and those without faith are driven to try and serve the homeless community and try and change this norm that it's become. And I think it's so vital with so many different groups within the city all wanting to do something good to coordinate that and show leadership. And I want to credit you with this, the vitality of this, the importance of this, to try and crack this and to bring about the change that this city so needs. Yes, it's about housing supply and reducing temporary accommodation, all those things, but it's about meeting that need and with all those organisations all wanting to do something, coordinating that, an effective strategy is very exciting and very positive. And I do thank you for doing that, and I really wish you every success. I wish this authority every success in its leadership with all those different groups that really want to do this well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mooton. Any further comments or questions on the report or the strategy or anything that's been said by Councillor Nan or Councillor Williams? No, in which case I'd really like to thank colleagues for their contributions to this discussion. I don't think any discussion could be more important. As Councillor Williams said, a decent, comfortable, safe, ideally permanent home is at the root of everything, and somebody's ability to survive and ideally thrive and fulfil their potential and play the role that they want to play in society and have the sort of bedrock of well-being and mental health being in a good place that we want all our residents to have. I really thank colleagues for bringing to bear their own personal lived experience to this conversation, which I think is incredibly important, and I know that lived experience has played a really significant role in drafting this strategy, and for bringing all of your insight about the situation we have in the city and your knowledge of it. So thank you. Cabinet happy to accept the recommendations in the report. Agreed. Thanks very much, colleagues. So we come to our final report after this mammoth cabinet meeting. This is the Royal Pavilion, thank you, Royal Pavilion and Museums Trust service fee 26 to 31. I'm going to ask Councillor Robbins to bid us farewell just temporarily while we consider this report. And once he has left the room, I'm going to ask Councillor Miller to introduce the report.
This report seeks Cabinet approval of the proposed service fee arrangements for the Royal Pavilion and Museums Trust. RPMT. This is for the next 5-year term, 2026 to 2031, which will be the second 5-year term in a 25-year services agreement. RPMT has been operating as an independent charitable trust for 5 years. The museum services transferred from the council during an exceptionally challenging period marked by the COVID-19 pandemic and the wider impacts of Brexit. Despite these pressures, RPMT have demonstrated areas of strong performance across cultural, educational and community programs. They have secured significant external capital investment for the city's heritage assets, achieving a main objective of creating an independent trust. The proposed fee structure, as set out in the report, aims to bring financial stability to both the council and the trust. Moving to a consolidated 5-year fee will reduce current financial volatility and support the long-term sustainability of the city's museum and heritage services, supporting our council plan objective, a city to be proud of. Deferral of loan repayments is recommended to ensure RPMT can build adequate reserves as required of a charitable organisation and to avoid the significant financial and operational risks associated with RPMT not achieving their business plan. It is important to note that RPMT was established without working capital or reserves. A £4 million loan facility was put in place in recognition of the exceptionally challenging times that the transfer took place. RPMT have drawn down £3 million from this facility. Should RPMT exceed their reserves position, the council will claim repayments. Cabinet is asked to consider the proposals as a balanced approach that protects our valued cultural services, maintains investment in our key heritage assets, and contributes to the council's wider financial planning objectives. Therefore, the recommendations before members are that, subject to the matters set out in the Part 1 and 2 reports, Cabinet agrees to the proposed annual fee of £1.9 million for the fee term 2026 to 31 for the RPMT service agreement. That Cabinet agrees to the deferral of loan repayments to 2031. And finally, that Cabinet agrees to delegate authority to the Corporate Director City Operations to make such variations as are required to the contractual documentation between the Council and RPMT to give effect to the recommendations above. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Comments and questions from Cabinet colleagues? Councillor Taylor.
Well, just to briefly say, thank again officers and Councillor Miller for their work on this, and that we've gone through this in a good amount of detail in preceding number of meetings. And whilst the overall funding position for both the council and the trust is obviously tricky on both sides, I'm supportive of this as a good point that we've got to, and probably the best outcome that we could get to. And I think overall Cabinet should support it as a way of sort of securing as best we can the financial position of both bodies going forward, whilst obviously still providing an amazing cultural offering, which is what we do have in the city, and we're very lucky to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Any further comments or questions from colleagues? No, in which case, is Cabinet happy to agree the recommendations detailed in this report? Agreed. Thank you very much, colleagues. Can we invite Councillor Robbins back into the room? Please.
Quite gone. Doing quite hard.
Welcome back, Councillor Robbins. I'm just going to round up by saying, does the Cabinet agree that the items listed in Part 2 should remain exempt for disclosure to the press and public?
Jump back one, we just need to agree the Part 2 minutes from our last meeting as well.
I knew there was something else I'd forgotten. Okay, does Cabinet agree to the Part 2 minutes of our previous Cabinet meeting in November as an accurate record? Agreed. Thank you, colleagues. I will now bring this meeting to a close. Thanks very much, everybody.